Welcome back to another story on Eclipse Wizardry. This time, we're bringing you, What If Gabrielle Delacour Met Harry at Dursleys age 5 and baby Veela magic claimed him before any witch could. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Spider's Friend. The spider had 7 legs. Harry had noticed this the first day he found it living in the crack between the garden wall and the rose bed, a fat, brown, entirely ordinary spider except for the missing 8th leg, which had probably been lost to a bird or a careless shoe. He'd named it Colonel. He wasn't sure why. It just looked like a colonel. He was sitting cross-legged in the dirt beside the rose bed now, elbows on his knees, watching Colonel navigate the complicated geography of a half-dead leaf. It was a Tuesday in late July, hot enough that the pavement out front shimmered, and Aunt Petunia had sent him outside after breakfast with instructions not to come back in until he'd pulled every weed from the vegetable patch and trimmed the hedge along the back fence. He'd done both by 9:30. It was now past noon. Dudley was at a friend's house. Vernon was at work. Petunia was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice carrying sharp and bright through the open window, laughing at something. Harry had learned not to go inside when she was on the phone. She didn't like being reminded he existed when she was trying to pretend she was a normal person with a normal life. He pushed his glasses up his nose, they were Dudley's old ones, too big, forever sliding, and watched Colonel change direction. "That way's a dead end," he said quietly. "There's nothing over there." Colonel continued toward the dead end. Harry had been talking to Colonel for 3 weeks. Not because he thought the spider understood him. He wasn't 5, he was 5, actually, but he wasn't stupid. He knew the spider didn't understand him. He talked to it because the sound of his own voice in the garden was better than the sound of his own voice nowhere at all. The toy soldier in his hand was missing its head. He'd found it in the bin outside after Dudley had snapped it off in a fit of boredom, and he'd rescued it the way he rescued most things, quietly, when nobody was watching, slipping it into his pocket and carrying it back to his cupboard like it was something worth keeping. He turned it over and over in his fingers now, the jagged neck of it catching on his thumb. He heard the gate. It wasn't the usual sound of the gate, the particular tired squeal it made when Uncle Vernon came home from work or when Mrs. Figg shuffled through with her shopping. This was lighter. Uncertain. Like whoever was opening it wasn't sure they should be. Harry looked up. The woman was the most beautiful person he had ever seen in his short life, which admittedly hadn't included very many beautiful people. She had silver gold hair piled loosely up off her neck and pale skin that seemed, very faintly, to catch the light wrong, like it was doing something light didn't normally do. She was tall and wearing a pale blue dress that was slightly too formal for Privet Drive on a Tuesday in July, and she was looking at the garden gate with an expression caught halfway between confusion and something sharper. Behind her, half hidden by the gate post, was a little girl. Harry stared. The girl was maybe his age, maybe a bit younger. Her hair was the same silver gold as the woman's, loose and long past her shoulders, and her eyes when they found his across the garden were a blue so pale it was almost colorless, almost silver. She was wearing a white dress with a yellow sash and she had a small scratch on her knee that someone had recently tried and mostly failed to clean up. She wasn't looking at the garden the way her mother was. She wasn't uncertain at all. She was looking at Harry like she'd been looking for him. He didn't move. Children who showed up at the house were usually Dudley's friends, which meant they were also enemies by extension, and Harry had learned to assess situations before committing to them. But Dudley's friends didn't look like this. They didn't have silver hair and strange pale eyes. They didn't look at him the way this girl was looking at him, like she was confirming something she'd already known. The woman said something in a language Harry didn't understand. French, maybe. He'd heard French once on the telly before Uncle Vernon changed the channel. She said it quietly and with a note of surprise, and then she looked at Harry too, and her expression shifted into something more careful. "Pardon," she said, her accent thick and musical. We Ave become turned around, I think. I am looking for." She stopped. She glanced at the little girl beside her. The little girl had taken 2 steps into the garden without anyone telling her she could. "Gabrielle," the woman said, in the tone of someone who says a name and means stop. The girl, Gabrielle, stopped walking, but she didn't look away from Harry. She tilted her head slightly, the way Colonel did when Harry spoke to him, and she said something in rapid French that made her mother's careful expression crack into something complicated and a bit alarmed. Harry stood up. He brushed the dirt off his trousers because Aunt Petunia would shout if he came inside with dirty trousers, and he held the headless soldier at his side and he said, "I'm Harry." Gabrielle looked at the toy soldier. Then she looked at his face. Then she crossed the remaining distance between them in 5 quick steps and held out her hand, not for shaking but palm up, like she was offering something or asking for something. Harry wasn't sure which. He looked at her hand, then at her face, then, because there was something about the directness of her gaze that made evasion feel pointless, he put the toy soldier in her outstretched palm. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at him. "Harry," she said. The H was almost silent, the way French people said it on the telly. EAD is missing. I know. I found him like that. You kept him anyway. He still works, Harry said, and wasn't sure why that felt important to say. He just doesn't have a head. Gabrielle considered this with a gravity that seemed very large for a 5-year-old, and then something happened. Harry felt it before he saw it, a warmth starting in the center of his chest, spreading outward the way heat spread from the radiator in the hallway when someone finally turned the heating on. It was nothing he'd ever felt before. Not like the weird tingly feeling he sometimes got when he was angry and the lights flickered, not like the dizzy feeling after he hadn't eaten. This was different. This was like something that had been pulled tight for a very long time suddenly going slack, or like a lock he hadn't known was on clicking open from the inside. Gabrielle's pale eyes went wide. Her free hand, not the one holding the soldier, came up and pressed flat against her own sternum, mirroring the warmth Harry felt in his chest, and she breathed out slowly like she'd been holding that breath since she was born. The woman behind her made a sharp sound. Not a scream, more like a word that got cut off before it could become one. She'd crossed the garden in the time it took Harry to blink and she was crouching in front of Gabrielle now, both hands on her daughter's shoulders, speaking fast and low in French. Harry caught the word non several times and something that sounded like a question. Gabrielle answered her mother. Her voice was calm and very certain. The woman sat back on her heels. She looked at Harry, really looked at him, the way adults almost never did, like she was cataloging something rather than dismissing it. Her eyes went to the hair he couldn't keep flat no matter what Aunt Petunia tried, to the scar on his forehead that people never asked about but always stared at, to the 2 big glasses and the 2 big hand-me-down shirt and the dirt on his knees from the garden. Her expression when she finished looking was not pity. Harry knew pity. Mrs. Figg looked at him with pity sometimes, when she thought he couldn't see. This wasn't pity. It was something older and less comfortable than pity. It looked, if Harry had had the vocabulary for it, like fury at something that wasn't him. "My name is Gabrielle Delacour," she said carefully. "And I must speak with someone in this booze. Is there an adult present?" Harry thought about this honestly. "My Aunt Petunia is on the phone. I will need to speak with her." "She's not going to like it," Harry said, because it seemed honest and important to establish that up front. "She doesn't like visitors who aren't from the neighborhood." Gabrielle Delacour looked at him for a moment with those pale, light-catching eyes. Then, very faintly, she smiled, and Harry understood for the first time why fairy tales talked about people whose smiles were dangerous. "I do not think," she said, "that your aunt will find it easy to say no to me." She was right. Harry watched from the kitchen doorway as Aunt Petunia, who had answered the door with her complaint already loading like a catapult, visible in the set of her jaw and the angle of her thin shoulders, stopped talking the moment she saw Gabrielle Delacour standing on the front step. Stopped and went slightly, interestingly blank, the way the telly went when the signal cut out. Apollon had done something, Harry was fairly sure. Not anything visible. Just adjusted herself in some way he couldn't name, and Petunia's catapult had quietly disarmed. "Madame Dursley," Apollon said pleasantly. "I am so sorry to intrude. I am Apollon Delacour. I believe you and I have something very important to discuss." Petunia stepped back and let her in, which was remarkable because Petunia did not let people in without an appointment and a good reason. Gabrielle came in behind her mother, and Harry fell into step behind Gabrielle, and nobody told him not to, which was also remarkable. They sat at the kitchen table. Petunia made tea with the slightly dazed efficiency of someone who wasn't entirely sure how they'd gotten here but was determined to do it correctly. Gabrielle sat beside Harry and put the headless soldier on the table between them like a centerpiece. Harry looked at it. She looked at him. Neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. Apollon accepted her tea, wrapped both hands around the mug, and said, "Madame Dursley. Do you know what a Veela is?" Petunia went very still. The mug she'd been raising stopped halfway to her mouth. I don't know what you mean." "I don't, your sister," Apollon said, gently but without retreat, "was a witch. You know that the world I am speaking of is real." She let that settle for a moment. "A Veela is, we are magical creatures, in the way that wizards are magical people. We are not the same. Our magic is older than theirs and it works by different rules. One of the rules," she paused, and glanced at her daughter, and something moved across her face. "One of the rules is that Veela magic in children, before it has been trained or contained, sometimes, chooses. They way a very young child cannot help how they feel. They way a child cannot help who they love. Gabrielle's magic has recognized your nephew. It has marked I'm." Harry was listening very carefully, the way he listened when adults talked about things that were actually about him while pretending they were having a conversation above his head. He understood approximately half of what Apollon was saying, but he understood the important half: something had happened. Something between him and Gabrielle had happened, and her mother knew what it was, and his aunt needed to know too. Petunia's face had gone through several stages of a very private argument. "What does that mean?" she finally said, and her voice was thin. "What does, marked him, what does that mean for?" "It means," Apollon said, "that my daughter and your nephew are connected. It is not romantic, madam, they are 5 years old, please. It is, protective is perhaps the closest English word. Veela claim people they believe need protection. They claim people who are," she searched for the word. "Lonely," she said, and looked at Harry when she said it, and didn't look away while she was saying it, and Harry decided in that moment that he didn't mind her looking. "My daughter has very powerful magic for her age. Unusually so. And she has chosen your nephew. Which means," she drew a breath. "Which means, he is under Veela protection. Which means, Madame Dursley, that if he is armed, my magic will know. My daughter's magic will know. And we will come." The kitchen was very quiet. A bee was bumbling against the window screen outside, trying to get in. Harry watched it and thought about what harm meant and whether the way Dudley sat on him counted, and whether the way Uncle Vernon grabbed his arm and squeezed counted, and whether the cupboard counted. He thought probably they did count. He thought Apollon Delacour probably knew they did count, from the way she was looking at Petunia with that pleasant expression that had very hard edges. Petunia set her mug down. She looked at Harry in the way she very rarely looked at him directly, not the sideways glance of someone calculating how to ignore him, but straight on, and there was something there he hadn't seen before. Not affection. But something that might, under entirely different circumstances, have wanted to be affection, and had been smothered under years of resentment and fear instead. "He's not mistreated," Petunia said, and it came out defensive, which told Harry everything about what she knew it sounded like. Non, Apollon said, and her voice was still pleasant. Of course not. I merely wanted to introduce myself. And to ensure that we are all aware. She was very good, Harry thought. She was saying one thing and meaning another and making sure Petunia understood both, and doing it with such perfect pleasantness that Petunia couldn't object without revealing that there was something to object about. He decided he liked Apollon Delacour very much. Gabrielle found the spider before Harry had a chance to introduce them. They were in the garden again, their mothers inside, the kitchen conversation continuing in the careful way of adults negotiating something complicated, and Gabrielle had gone straight to the rose bed with the confidence of someone who knew interesting things lived there. She was crouching in the dirt, her white dress already claiming its first grass stain, watching Colonel with absolute attention. As 7 legs, she said. I know. He lost one. How do you know it's a boy? Harry opened his mouth and then realized he didn't actually know. I just named him Colonel. It seemed like a Colonel name. Gabrielle reached out one careful finger and Colonel, who had never shown any particular interest in Harry's fingers, walked right onto hers. She lifted him slowly and regarded him at eye level. Hello, Colonel, she said solemnly. He can't understand you, Harry said. Maybe not, Gabrielle agreed, watching Colonel's 7 legs navigate her knuckle. But it is still polite. Harry sat down beside her in the dirt and thought about that. Why did your mum want to talk to my aunt? Gabrielle didn't look up from the spider. Because of what, Apeened? The warm thing? She did look up then, surprised, or maybe pleased, he couldn't quite tell. You felt it too? Yeah. She returned to watching Colonel. My maman says it is Veela magic. My magic. She says it appends sometimes to Veela children, we find someone. And our magic decides. She paused. She was frightened when she saw. Not of you. Of what it means. It is a big thing. Are you frightened? Harry asked. Gabrielle looked at him again, straight and calm. Non, she said simply. Are you? Harry thought about it honestly, the same way he'd assessed the gate opening earlier. The warmth was still there, not as sharp as it had been in that first moment, but present, the way the heat of something you'd been standing near stayed in your skin after you'd moved away. He thought about whether frightened was the word for it. It wasn't. It was something stranger and in a very different direction from frightened. No, he said. She nodded once, as if that confirmed something. Then she gently set Colonel back on the rose bed and wiped her finger on the grass and said, Will you show me the rest of the garden? He showed her the vegetable patch and the place behind the shed where a family of hedgehogs had been living in April, and the crack in the fence that you could see Mr. Prentice from 3 houses down through if you waited long enough. He showed her the bucket where he kept his garden tools because Aunt Petunia didn't let him store them in the shed. There wasn't room, she said, which wasn't entirely a lie in a house where Dudley's broken toys were kept for sentimental reasons, but it wasn't entirely the truth either. Gabrielle didn't say anything sympathetic about the bucket. She just picked up the small hand trowel and turned it over and put it back, matter of fact, the way you acknowledged a fact without making it into something worse by pitying it. He showed her the broken flower pot by the back step that he'd cracked accidentally 2 years ago and had been glued and cracked and glued again since, and she crouched to look at it and said, My maman dropped a vase once and it made a sound like a small explosion. She was so angry. What happened? They vase came back together, Gabrielle said, glancing up with a small smile. Veela magic. When my maman is very upset it sometimes, she made a small gesture with her fingers, like something clicking back into place. Fixes zings. Or breaks zings. It depends. My magic breaks things, Harry said, and then stopped, because he didn't talk about that, he never talked about that, he didn't even really think about it as magic except in the moments when it happened and he was usually too busy bracing for the aftermath to name it. Gabrielle didn't look surprised. What kind of zings? Lights mostly. Sometimes things move. Once I ended up on the school roof. He paused. I didn't mean to. Can you make zings happen on purpose? Harry thought about Colonel, and how sometimes when he was talking to the spider and his mind went very still and he wanted Colonel to come closer, Colonel came closer. Maybe sometimes, he said carefully. By accident on purpose. Gabrielle nodded again with that gravity of hers, accepting it the way she'd accepted the missing-headed soldier, complete and without judgment. My papa says all magic is accident on purpose until someone teaches you what to do with it. Your dad knows about magic? None. But he is very smart about other things. She looked thoughtful. I will teach you some French, she announced. And you will teach me about your magic. Is that fair? Harry had never been asked if anything was fair before. The word had a slightly unused quality in his mouth. Yes, he said. That's fair. They were called back inside when the afternoon light started going amber, and the kitchen had changed in their absence. Not physically, the kettle was still where it was, the bee had finally given up on the window, but the quality of the air was different. Aunt Petunia was standing at the counter with her back to the room and the rigid set of her shoulders was the particular one she used when she'd been told something she couldn't unhear. Apollon was standing in the middle of the kitchen looking like she'd arrived at an agreement and was waiting to see if the other party would honor it. There was a small box on the table. White, with a pale blue ribbon. Harry stared at it because there were almost never boxes for him. Dudley's birthday produced boxes in stacks, in towers, in the kind of numbers that required a second room. Harry's birthday produced nothing at all. Gabrielle, Apollon said, show Harry what we brought. Gabrielle went to the table with the confidence of someone who already knew what was in the box and opened it without ceremony. Inside, nested in white tissue paper, was a small mirror, round, with a frame made of something pearlescent, shot through with silver. It was the most beautiful small object Harry had ever seen, which wasn't hard competition given the contents of his cupboard, but he thought it would have been beautiful anywhere. "The mirror is for communication," Apollon said, looking at Harry now with the same direct attention she'd given him across the garden gate. "It is paired with one I ave at home. You speak to it and I will hear you. If something happens, if you need someone, you use it." She paused. "Do you understand what I am telling you?" Harry understood. He understood precisely. He looked at the mirror and then at Apollon and said, "Yes." And then, because he was 5 and honest, "Thank you." Apollon's expression did something complicated. She crouched to his level, which adults rarely bothered with, and looked at him very steadily. "I want you to listen to me, Harry," she said, her accent making the H almost nothing. "What happened in that garden today it is not small. My daughter's magic chose you. That does not happen with nothing. It does not happen with ordinary people in the sense of, overlooked people, not important people, you understand? Veela magic does not choose people who are not worth choosing." Harry held very still. "You are going to have an extraordinary life," she said. "Not as a promise and not as a threat but as a plain fact, the way you told someone the weather. And Gabrielle will be part of it. And so, as it turns out, will I." She glanced at her daughter, who was rewrapping the mirror in its tissue paper with careful hands. "I am sorry no one told you sooner that you were worth choosing." Harry didn't know what to do with that. He held the headless soldier and thought about Colonel navigating the dead end, and about the warmth that was still, faintly, behind his sternum, and about the fact that for the first time in his memory someone had looked at him and not found the inventory wanting. Aunt Petunia made a short sound from the counter, not a word, just a sound, and didn't turn around. Gabrielle put the mirror back in its box and held it out to Harry. He took it. They stayed for another hour. In that hour, Harry learned that Gabrielle was 4, not 5, and small for it, and that she had an older sister named Fleur who was 7 and had, apparently, strong opinions about everything. He learned that their house in France was near a river and that Gabrielle thought rivers were boring and forests were not. He learned that she was learning to read in French and that French had rules about which letters you didn't say, which Harry thought sounded like an extraordinary waste of good letters. He taught her how to say Colonel without making it sound like Cunnel, and she taught him how to say bonjour and au revoir and the French word for spider, which was araignée, and which Harry immediately committed to memory because it was long and unnecessary and magnificent. Apollon spoke to Aunt Petunia twice more before they left, once in the kitchen and once at the front door. Harry wasn't there for either conversation. He understood that they were the kind of conversations that didn't need a child present to have an effect on a child's life. At the door, Gabrielle stopped and turned and looked at Harry with her pale silvery eyes and the afternoon light on her silver gold hair, and she said, "I will write to you. In French. You will Ave to learn to read it." "I don't know enough French yet," Harry said. "I will teach you," Gabrielle said, as if this had already been settled, as if it was already done. "Also I am keeping Colonel in my heart," she added, very seriously. "Not in a jar or anything. Just in my heart." Harry had no idea how to respond to that. "Okay," he said. She nodded once, satisfied, and followed her mother down the front path. Harry stood in the doorway watching them go and felt the warmth in his chest shift, not lessen, just settle, like something finding its permanent place. The gate squealed shut behind them. Harry went back inside. Aunt Petunia was in the sitting room, not watching the television even though it was on, and she didn't tell Harry to go to his cupboard or remind him about dinner. He went to the kitchen and looked at the box on the table and thought. He opened it and took out the mirror. It was warm in his hands, slightly, in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He turned it over. The back was smooth except for a small engraving, 2 letters intertwined, AG and something else he didn't recognize. He carried it to his cupboard and found a space for it on the shelf, next to the headless soldier, between the library book he hadn't returned because it was about spiders and he hadn't finished it yet and the stub of birthday candle from 3 years ago when Mrs. Fig had given him a cupcake and told him to make a wish. He stood in the small square of his cupboard looking at these things on the shelf, and added the mirror to the collection, and thought about what Apollon had said about being worth choosing. Then he went back outside because there was still an hour of daylight left and Colonel was still out there and he wanted to tell him about the afternoon. Colonel, reliably, did not understand a word. Harry told him anyway. He was sitting cross-legged in the dirt by the rose bed, talking about 7-legged spiders and French words for them, when he noticed it. The warmth behind his sternum, that new, permanent warmth, pulsed once, the way a heartbeat pulses. Just once. Like a signal. He pressed his hand flat to his chest, mirroring without knowing it the gesture Gabrielle had made when it first happened, and he sat there in the garden on Privet Drive in the golden tail end of a July afternoon, 5 years old and nobody in particular to anyone except possibly a spider and now, apparently, a 4-year-old girl with silver hair and a very serious face and magic that had looked at him across a garden and decided he was enough. More than enough. Worth it. He let out a breath he'd been holding, he thought, for approximately 5 years. Araignée, he told Colonel, testing the word out loud, and the lights in the kitchen window flickered once and then steadied, and that was fine, that was just magic doing what magic did when he was calm and certain and not afraid. He wasn't afraid. He filed that away next to the word araignée and the warm settled weight in his chest and the mirror on the shelf in the cupboard. These were the things that were his. He hadn't had very many before today. Chapter 2, Letters in 2 Languages. The first letter arrived 11 days after Gabrielle left. Harry knew it was coming because Apollon had explained the owl post to Aunt Petunia in the same pleasant with hard edges voice she'd used for everything else, and Aunt Petunia had said absolutely not in this neighborhood, and Apollon had smiled and said of course, madam, in a tone that meant she'd send the owl anyway. So when the tawny owl landed on the kitchen windowsill at 7 in the morning and tapped the glass with the calm authority of something that had never once been told it wasn't allowed somewhere, Harry was ready. Petunia was not. She dropped the egg she was cracking and said something Harry wasn't supposed to hear. The egg yolk ran across the counter in a slow, unconcerned way. Harry opened the window before she could stop him, took the letter from the owl's leg. The owl accepted this with the weary dignity of a professional, and the owl was gone before Petunia had recovered enough to object. He took the letter to his cupboard. The envelope was thick cream paper and his name was written on the front in purple ink, in handwriting that sloped enthusiastically to the right. "Harry," it said, without an H, which made him smile before he'd even opened it. He opened it. The inside was 3 pages, both sides, written in French. Harry could read approximately 6 words of French. He knew bonjour and au revoir and araignée and colonel and non and oui. He recognized exactly 4 of those in the letter. He read it 4 times, very carefully, before accepting that this was not enough and sitting back against his cupboard wall with the pages in his lap. Gabrielle had told him she'd write in French. He'd agreed. He now realized he'd agreed to something with consequences he hadn't fully calculated, which Uncle Vernon would have said was typical of him, but which Harry preferred to think of as optimistic. He took the mirror off the shelf. "Hello?" he said to it, feeling slightly silly. "Mrs. Delacour?" Nothing happened for long enough that he was starting to feel very silly, and then the mirror fogged the way mirrors fogged in cold bathrooms and Apollin's voice came through it, clear and warm and slightly amused. "Bonjour, Harry. You received the letter?" "Yes. I can't read most of it." A pause. "Non. I imagine not." Another pause. "Shall I read it to you?" So Apollon read him Gabrielle's first letter, stopping to translate as she went, and this was how Harry learned that Gabrielle had told Colonel to wait for her, that she had looked up 7-legged spiders in a book and found they were called Tegenaria, which she thought was much less good a name than Colonel, that her sister Fleur had said the Veela claim story was impossible. "Gabby, you made that up," and that Gabrielle had responded to this by not speaking to Fleur for 2 days, and that their house near the river had a pear tree in the garden that was dropping pears and their dog Meal kept eating them and making herself sick and they weren't sure what to do about Meal. Harry listened to all of this with total attention. When Apollon finished he said, "How do I write back in French?" "You do not, yet. You write back in English. Gabrielle will translate with me. This is how she will learn English and you will learn French, yes. Practice." It was the most sensible thing Harry had heard in his life. He thought about the library books under his mattress and the way he read everything he could get his hands on at school because reading was free, you didn't need permission and you didn't need money, and he thought about what it would mean to be able to read a whole other language. A whole other world of things. "Yes," he said. "Okay." He wrote back that afternoon with a pencil and a piece of paper from the notepad Aunt Petunia kept by the telephone, writing small to fit more in, telling Gabrielle that Colonel was well and had found a new section of Rose bed and that Meal should probably be kept away from the pear tree rather than trying to fix Meal, that you fixed the situation rather than the animal, which was advice he'd found worked in most circumstances. He signed it Harry without any uncertainty, folded it, and gave it to the owl that arrived for it the next morning with the punctuality of something running on a schedule. That was August. By September, Harry had started school and learned that learning things you weren't supposed to learn was its own particular skill. The school was ordinary and close and smelled of pencil shavings and industrial cleaning fluid. Harry liked it immediately and fiercely and quietly, the way he liked most things, without telling anyone, because telling anyone you liked something was an invitation for it to be taken away. He liked reading most. He liked math second. He was careful to get test scores that were better than average but not so much better than Dudley's that Dudley would come home and complain and Uncle Vernon would. He'd been doing this calculation since his first day of school without needing to articulate it. He wrote to Gabrielle about school. She wrote back about her school, she called it l'école, which Harry now knew, and about her teacher, Madame Colbert, who wore her hair in a bun so tight it seemed to physically restrain her emotions. She wrote about Fleur, who had arrived at the age of 7 at Beauxbatons Academy for a preliminary visit and returned home vibrating with ambition in a way that had apparently changed the energy of the entire house. Gabrielle's letters switched, after 2 months, from French with English translation to French with gaps where the English words she didn't know had blanks that Harry filled in. By November she was writing full paragraphs in English between the French ones. By December her English was functional and fast and characteristically direct. Fleur says the Veela claim is a fantasy children's story. I told her it was real. She said prove it. I put her favorite ribbon on the top shelf where she cannot reach it using only my magic. She is still annoyed. I consider this proof. Harry laughed at this alone in his cupboard at 10 at night, which was the first time he'd laughed alone at 10 at night without it having an edge of desperation to it. He wrote back, "Did she get the ribbon down?" "Eventually. But I made my point." Fair. Christmas that year was the same as Christmas every year, Dudley's present stacked like a monument to consumer enthusiasm, Harry's singular gift from Aunt Petunia, which was a pair of socks, which was genuinely useful and he kept them. What was different that year was the package. It arrived via owl on Christmas morning before anyone was awake, which meant Harry found it when he crept out of his cupboard at 6 in the morning to use the bathroom. It was sitting on the kitchen table and it had his name on it in that enthusiastic rightward-sloping purple handwriting. He took it back to his cupboard and sat cross-legged on his mattress and opened it. Inside was a French dictionary, not a traveler's phrase book but a real thick dictionary, with a dark green cover and thin pages, the kind you used when you were serious about a language. Under the dictionary was a small notebook with Harry's French written on the cover in Gabrielle's handwriting, and inside the first page she'd written out a grammar table in purple ink with small illustrations at the margins, a spider next to Araignée, a sun next to Soleil, a small fierce-looking owl next to Hibou. Under the notebook was a letter. Harry. Joyeux Noël. This means Merry Christmas. I asked Maman what to give you and she said to give you something useful, and I said but it should also be beautiful, and she said yes, both. The dictionary is useful. The notebook is useful and beautiful, I drew the pictures myself. The last thing is from Maman. He reached into the package. The last thing was small and wrapped separately. He unwrapped it. It was a wand. Not a real one. It was too light and the wood was wrong, smooth and pale and something he didn't recognize, and when he held it nothing happened except the warmth in his chest shifted slightly, like something nodding in its sleep. A note from Apollon was attached. For practice. I have consulted with a friend who knows wand theory. This will help you learn to direct your magic intentionally before you receive a proper wand at 11. Think of it as learning to write before you receive a proper pen. Do not show it to your relatives. Happy Christmas, Harry. Harry sat in his cupboard on Christmas morning with a French dictionary and a grammar notebook with a spider drawn in the margin and a practice wand, and felt something that took him a long moment to identify because he encountered it so rarely. He felt looked after. He tried the practice wand. He pointed it at the headless soldier on the shelf and thought about what he wanted very clearly, not panicked magic, not accidental, but deliberate, the way Apollon had said, accident on purpose made into just on purpose, and the soldier wobbled. Just a wobble. But a wobble he'd done on purpose. He did it again. The soldier fell off the shelf. He picked it up and tried again, and this time he slid it gently to the left, 3 inches, controlled, and sat back and stared at it and felt something enormous and wordless in his chest that might have been the beginning of understanding what he was. Time, which is indifferent to the lives it moved through the next 3 years with the particular momentum of children growing up. Harry grew. Not fast, the Dursleys table didn't encourage fast growing, but steadily. He grew into his glasses in that his face caught up with them, somewhat. He grew into a habit of silence that wasn't the scared silence of before but the observational kind, the kind that collects information while everyone else is spending their noise. He grew into the practice wand the way a musician grows into scales, awkwardly and then fluently and then without having to think about it. He practiced every night in his cupboard for 20 minutes, point and move, point and hold, point and release, finding the grammar of intentional magic the way he was finding the grammar of French, through repetition and attention and the building certainty that there were rules to this and the rules were learnable. By age 7, he could move objects silently without the wand. He discovered this by accident when he was in the school library and needed a book from a high shelf and there was no chair and he looked at the book and it came down, and he caught it, and the librarian wasn't watching, and he stood there for 5 seconds processing what had just happened. He didn't tell anyone. But that evening he wrote to Gabrielle and said, "I think the wand was training wheels." She wrote back the next day, which was fast for owl post, which meant she'd been waiting. "What are training wheels?" He wrote back an explanation of bicycles. She wrote back that this was interesting and that she had also had a development, which was that her hair had done something yesterday. She wasn't going to put it in the letter but she would tell him over the mirror. He called her that evening. The mirror had evolved as a communication device over 3 years. It started as a one-way voice thing and then Gabrielle had apparently done something to hers, with Apollin's help, that made the glass show faint images, not clear, more like looking through frosted glass, shapes and light and color, enough to know you were talking to a person and not just a voice. "My hair went white," Gabrielle said, her face a pale blur in the glass. Completely white. Like Grandmere Mathilde's. Then it went back. "Maman says it's the Veela coming in. Is that good?" "Maman says it appends to most Veela girls around 7. It means," a pause, the sound of her choosing words. "It means the Veela part is waking up. Like the magic inside is deciding to be itself." Harry thought about his books falling off the high shelf. "I think mine's doing something similar." Magic deciding to be itself? Yeah. A thoughtful silence on her end. "We are growing up. Apparently." "I do not think," Gabrielle said, with that gravity that had not diminished with age but had deepened, become something less like a child imitating seriousness and more like actual seriousness, "that we will be ordinary when we are grown." "Probably not," Harry agreed. He was 7, sitting in his cupboard, talking through a magic mirror to a 6-year-old girl in France, while a headless soldier and a French dictionary sat on his shelf and somewhere behind his sternum a warm thread ran outward and didn't end. "I don't think we're supposed to be." When Harry was 8, 3 things happened that changed the shape of his world. The first was that Vernon hit him. Not the rough grab-and-squeeze that had happened before, not the towering red-faced shout that was its own kind of weapon. A proper hit, backhand, because Harry had used a word at dinner that Vernon decided was insolent, which it might have been. Harry had a gift for a certain kind of quiet precision that landed like insolence even when it was just accurate, and Vernon had hit him hard enough that his glasses skidded across the kitchen floor. Harry sat very still. His cheek burned. He watched his glasses lying on the tiles from a distance of 4 feet and thought in a very clear and separate way that this was what Apollon had meant when she said "if he is harmed." He didn't cry. He picked up his glasses and went to his cupboard and took out the mirror. Apollon's voice, when he told her, was very quiet. Not upset quiet, controlled quiet, which was worse, which was the kind of quiet that preceded action. She asked him 2 questions. He answered both. She told him she would handle it. He asked her how. "You do not need to know how," she said. "You need to know that it will be led and it will not happen again. Can you trust me?" Harry thought about the past 3 years. About the dictionary and the grammar notebook and the practice wand and the way she always answered the mirror when he called and the way she'd spoken to Petunia at that kitchen table like someone who could afford to be pleasant because she didn't need to be loud to be heard. "Yes," he said. It didn't happen again. He never knew exactly what Apollon did. But for approximately 2 weeks after that evening, Vernon Dursley had the particular manner of a man who had been quietly informed that the consequences of a specific behavior were significantly larger than he'd calculated, and he ate his dinners without incident and did not raise his voice above a certain volume around Harry and once, remarkably, said "pass the salt please" instead of just the salt. Harry noted all of this and did not comment and added it to his understanding of how power actually worked in the world, which was not usually through the person who shouted loudest. The second thing that happened when Harry was 8 was that Albus Dumbledore visited Privet Drive. Harry wasn't supposed to know. Petunia didn't tell him. But the walls of number 4 were thin and Harry had been a quiet listener his entire life, and Dumbledore had a voice that carried the unconscious confidence of someone who had never had a reason to whisper. He heard, "The boy, Petunia. How is the boy?" He heard Petunia's answering tight syllables, performing normality. He heard, "I trust the protections have been sufficient." The blood wards, he heard Petunia say something sharp and short. He heard, "It is for his own safety, you understand." When the time comes, he stopped listening there, not because he'd stopped wanting to hear but because he'd heard enough. He sat on the bottom step of the stairs where he'd crept without making a sound and thought about several things. Blood wards. His safety. When the time comes. The scar on his forehead and the fact that nobody had ever explained it. The fact that he apparently had a history that people talked about in concerned tones and never mentioned to him. He was 8, but he'd spent 8 years as the quietest person in every room, gathering every scrap of information thrown near him, and he was beginning to understand that the scraps added up. He went back upstairs before Dumbledore left. He heard the door close. He waited until Petunia was back in the kitchen and then he went down and got the mirror. "Apollon," he said. "Harry. What is wrong?" "Someone came to visit," he said. "An old man. He talked about blood wards and my safety and something coming." He paused. "Who knows about me? Like, who in the magic world knows about me specifically?" A silence. "Apollon. You are asking a question," she said carefully, "that as a long answer." "I'm 8, Harry said. "I can handle a long answer." Another silence, longer. He had the impression of a decision being made. And then Apollon said, "Find somewhere comfortable to sit. I am going to tell you about the night your parents died." He sat on his mattress and listened for 40 minutes. She told him about Voldemort, and she used the name, without flinching, which Harry noted, and the war, and the deaths, and the night at Godric's Hollow. She told him about the curse that should have killed him and didn't, and what that meant, and why everyone in the wizarding world knew his name. She told him about Dumbledore, carefully, without making him into a villain or a hero, just a man with a plan that was very old and had never once been updated to include Harry's own perspective on it. "Has been managing you," Apollon said. "Since before you were old enough to be managed. Ze blood wards, ze placement was your relatives, ze isolation. It is not, I do not believe wishes you harm, Harry. But has made you a piece on a board without asking if you wished to play." Harry listened to all of this. Outside his cupboard, Privet Drive did its ordinary evening things. A car going past, a dog barking 3 streets over, the distant sound of Dudley's television. Inside his cupboard, Harry sat with the mirror and absorbed the information the way he absorbed everything, completely, methodically, without performing a reaction. When she finished, he said, "He doesn't know about you." "About Gabrielle?" "About the claim?" "Non. He does not. He'd want to, if he did." "Yes," Apollon said. "He would." "Then we don't tell him." It wasn't a question. Not yet. The pause on Apollon's side had something that might have been approval in it. "Non," she said. "Not yet." Harry put the mirror down and lay back on his mattress and looked at the underside of the stairs above him, the familiar grain of the wood, the nail heads, the water stain in the corner that had been there since before he could remember. He thought about being a piece on a board. He thought about Apollon's voice saying you do not need to know how, you need to know it will be handled, and about the practice wand, and about 3 years of French grammar. He thought about Gabrielle saying I do not think we will be ordinary when we are grown. He got up and took the practice wand off the shelf and pointed it at the water stain in the corner of the ceiling and concentrated, not to do anything to it but to understand something, and what he understood, concentrating in that dark small space, was that the difference between a piece on a board and a player at the table was preparation. He put the wand down and picked up the French dictionary. He studied until midnight. The third thing that happened when Harry was 8 was that he met Fleur Delacour. Gabrielle had been lobbying for this for a year. "You must meet Fleur, she is insufferable but she is also brilliant and you will like each other eventually. She has decided she does not like you but she has never met you and this is unreasonable and I've told her so." "How do you know she doesn't like me if she's never met me?" Harry had written back. "Because she is jealous of you. Don't tell her I said so." The meeting happened because Apollon organized it, a visit to London in October, nominally a shopping trip, practically a summit. They met in a café in Diagon Alley that Apollon had specified, which told Harry that the magical world had a geography he hadn't accessed yet, a whole parallel city folded inside the ordinary one. Diagon Alley was the first time Harry had walked through the wizarding world while knowing who he was and what he was walking into. He felt people look at him. Not many, some. The ones who recognized the scar, the eyes, the hair that wouldn't lie flat. He looked back at them steadily and didn't perform discomfort and they found somewhere else to look. He was 8 and small for it and wearing Dudley's third best jumper, but he'd been practicing stillness and directness since he was 5 and he walked through Diagon Alley without once looking like he didn't have the right to be there. Apollon was waiting outside the café with both girls. Gabrielle was immediately herself. She crossed the distance between them the way she had in the garden 3 years ago, without hesitation, and stopped in front of him with her silver pale eyes and her grave face and said, "You are taller." "You are too," he said. "Obviously." She reached out and poked his glasses, which were currently staying on his face without falling because Apollon had arranged to have them properly fitted last year, which was the second thing Harry had filed under what it feels like to be looked after. Still terrible glasses. They're functional. They are ugly. "Gabrielle," Apollon said mildly. Then, "Harry. It is good to see you." Apollon looked the same, beautiful and light-catching and warm in a way that was different from other people's warm, a Veela warmth that Harry had gotten used to the same way you got used to any environment you spent enough time in. She hugged him briefly and he stood in the hug and tried to figure out how hugs worked from a technical standpoint because he got them rarely enough that he hadn't had much practice. Then Fleur. She was 10, tall for it, silver gold like her mother and sister, with a face already arranging itself toward the kind of beauty that would be genuinely inconvenient in a few years. She was looking at Harry with an expression that had been engineered to be neutral but was doing something underneath that Gabrielle had correctly identified as jealousy, though Harry thought territorial confusion was also part of it. She'd been told her whole life that the Veela claim was extraordinary, a once-in-a-generation event, proof of her sister's exceptional magic. And then this unremarkable-looking boy in the wrong-size jumper had walked up and said "You are too" to Gabrielle's "You are taller," and Gabrielle had poked his glasses and grinned, and there was between them something that had nothing to do with Fleur's assessment of the situation. "Fleur," Harry said. "Harry Potter," she said, and managed to make the name sound like something she was deciding whether to approve. "Gabrielle says you're brilliant," Harry said. "She also says you're insufferable but she said to tell you the brilliant part." Gabrielle made a small strangled sound. Fleur blinked. The territorial confusion expression lost a layer. She looked at him with sharper attention. "She told you both?" "She wanted me to be prepared." A pause. Something in Fleur's face shifted, not into warmth, not yet, but into something more like interest than dismissal. "You are direct," she said. "So are you," Harry said. "Gabrielle says it runs in the family." "Gabrielle says a great many zings," Fleur said, shooting her sister a sideways look, but the edge was leaving her voice. They had lunch in the café, real food, which Harry ate at the steady unhurried pace of someone who had learned not to look like they were hungry, and Apollon ordered for everyone and asked Harry about his magic practice and asked questions that were actually interested in the answers, and Fleur watched this exchange with growing bemusement at the ease of it, the way Harry answered Apollon directly and without performance. By the end of lunch, Fleur had asked him 2 things about wandless magic. She'd been studying theory, she said, at Beauxbatons. She was already ahead, and Harry had told her about the library shelf incident and the overhead lights in his cupboard, and Fleur's beautiful engineered neutrality had cracked into something genuine and enthusiastic. "You are doing instinctive wandless workings at 8, she said flatly. "Without training." "With some training," Harry said. "Your mom gave me a practice wand." Fleur looked at Apollon. "You gave he needed direction," Apollon said pleasantly. "Eat your tart, Fleur." Fleur ate her tart with the air of someone filing information rapidly. Then she looked at Harry and said, "When you get to Hogwarts you will be interesting." Coming from Fleur, who had been to Beauxbatons on a preliminary visit and come home with opinions about everyone, Harry understood this was the most straightforward form of acceptance she offered. "I'll try," he said. "Don't try," Fleur said, with sudden sharpness. "Don't try to be interesting. Be what you are and let them catch up." Harry looked at her. She looked at him. Gabrielle looked at both of them with an expression that said she had known this was coming and was pleased with the result. "Okay," Harry said. Walking back through Diagon Alley afterward, Gabrielle fell into step beside him and said quietly, "She likes you. She barely spoke to me for the first 20 minutes. For Fleur," Gabrielle said seriously, "that is basically love." He was 9 when Dumbledore came back to Privet Drive. This time Harry answered the door. He'd been home alone, Petunia at the shops, Dudley at school, Vernon at work, and when the knock came at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning he opened the door without thinking, and there was the old man from the description Apollon had given him, tall, spectacularly long beard, half-moon spectacles, eyes very blue and very sharp, and currently doing a rapid assessment of the small dark-haired boy who had opened the door while running the same assessment right back at him. "Harry," Dumbledore said warmly. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. The warmth stayed but adjusted, recalibrated for a child who knew his name. "You know who I am. I've heard of you." Harry stepped back, the way he'd watched Apollon step back, giving ground gracefully because it cost nothing when you'd already decided what you would and wouldn't give. "My aunt isn't home." "Actually," Dumbledore said, with a smile that had depth and intelligence in it, "I came to see you." He looked at Harry over his half-moon spectacles. "You've grown." Harry had a policy, developed over 3 years of thinking about Dumbledore as a figure in a complicated story: observe, give nothing away, take everything available. He stepped back and let him in. Dumbledore sat in the sitting room and Harry sat across from him, and they looked at each other with the mutual assessment of 2 people who were each considerably more than they appeared. "How are you finding things?" Dumbledore asked, in the voice of someone who asked this question as an opener and not because he wanted the actual answer. "Fine," Harry said. "School? Friends?" "Fine. Some. Your relatives treat you well?" Harry looked at him. "Not a flicker." "Fine," he said. Dumbledore's blue eyes were doing things behind the half-moon glasses. He was trying to read a 9-year-old and finding the 9-year-old surprisingly opaque, which Harry could see was an interesting experience for him. "You know," Dumbledore said, shifting slightly, "you will be receiving a letter in 2 years. From Hogwarts. Your parents' school." "I know what Hogwarts is," Harry said. Another small recalibration. "Of course. You're a bright boy, I'm sure you've read about it." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, conspiratorial in the way of adults who wanted a child to feel included in something. "There's a great deal to look forward to. Friends, magic, learning your gifts properly. I look forward to watching you grow into them." Harry thought about what Apollon had said. "He has made you a piece on a board without asking if you wished to play. What do you know about my gifts already?" Harry asked. Dumbledore's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. I beg your pardon? You look forward to watching me grow into them. So you know something about what they are. What do you know? A pause, brief. You are your parents' son, Dumbledore said warmly. Brilliant, both of them. The magic will follow. He hadn't answered the question. Harry noted this without showing he'd noted it. They talked for 20 more minutes. Harry gave information away at a controlled rate, enough to be a normal 9-year-old, not enough to be interesting, a performance of ordinary competence. Dumbledore told him about Hogwarts with the enthusiasm of a man who loved it genuinely and believed that love was sufficient answer for everything. Harry listened and was politely enthusiastic and let Dumbledore believe he was less and less and less than he was, and when Dumbledore stood to leave he said, I look forward to seeing you at Hogwarts, Harry, with real warmth. I look forward to it too, Harry said, and he meant it, just not for the reasons Dumbledore assumed. He closed the door and stood in the hall and thought about the next 2 years. He thought about what he needed to know and how to know it. He thought about Fleur's voice, be what you are and let them catch up. He picked up the mirror. Apollon, he said. I need books. Whatever the Hogwarts students read, and whatever they don't. A pause. How many books? Harry thought about 2 years of evenings and weekends and school holidays. As many as you can send, he said. The owls started arriving 3 days later. Not 1 or 2, a relay of them, French owls mostly, carrying packages wrapped in brown paper, 2 or 3 at a time, building a stack under Harry's mattress and then overflowing the cupboard and then requiring Petunia to be negotiated with about a shelf in the box room. Petunia looked at the books and looked at Harry and said nothing. Harry thought she was getting better at nothing. It was, he'd decided, her best quality. He read until the words made shapes he could use. He practiced until the magic came when he called it. He wrote to Gabrielle every week in French that was getting faster and cleaner, and she wrote back in English that was getting the same, and they were 10 years old and the world ahead of them was very large and they were building toward it with the patient industry of people who understood that the point was not to arrive quickly. The point was to arrive ready. The last letter before Hogwarts came the August before he turned 11, written in Gabrielle's now confident English with a few French phrases wound through it like threads in cloth. Harry. In 2 weeks you go to Hogwarts and I will not see you in person until, I don't know when. This is annoying. I have decided to be annoyed about it. Maman says I will see you for the holidays but the holidays feel far away. I want to tell you something. When I was 4 and I walked into that garden and saw you, I didn't know what was happening. I just knew it was right. Now I am 8 and I know more about what it means and I still think that. I think we are going to do very large things. I think the world is going to be surprised by us. Be what you are, Harry. Don't let them make you smaller. Je t'aime, mon ami. Harry read the letter twice, then once more. Then he folded it and put it with the others, 3 years of letters, in a tin box he'd bought himself with money from helping Mr. Prentice with his garden, and he sat in the box room that had been his real bedroom for the past 2 years, because Apollon had arranged that too, quietly and without drama, and he thought about being made smaller. He thought about all the ways it had been tried. Then he looked at the stack of books beside his bed and the practice wand on his shelf that he hadn't needed in a year and a half, and he thought about Gabrielle walking into a garden at 4 years old like she already knew he was there. Je t'aime aussi, he said to the room, in French that was clean and certain and fully his. Outside, the August evening was doing its ordinary summer thing. In 2 weeks, Harry Potter would walk into Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry carrying 6 years of preparation and a warmth behind his sternum and the absolute certainty that he was not a piece on anyone's board. He slept easily. He always slept easily now. Chapter 3, The Sorting Doesn't Know What to Do with Him. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 10:15, which gave him 45 minutes to watch things happen before he had to participate in them. He'd learned this trick early, arrive before the crowd, find the shape of the space, understand the geometry before it got complicated by people. Platform 9 3/4 was extraordinary. Not in the way Diagon Alley had been extraordinary. Diagon Alley was extraordinary the way a city was extraordinary, layered and dense and full of its own logic. This was different. This was a platform that existed between things, folded into the ordinary infrastructure of King's Cross Station like a secret kept in plain sight, and it smelled of coal smoke and magic and the particular excitement of people about to go somewhere significant. Harry pushed his trolley through the barrier at a steady walk and came out the other side and stood still for a moment, just looking. The scarlet engine. The steam. The older students moving with the confident ease of people returning to a place they owned. The first years clustering in tight nervous groups, clutching their tickets, overwhelmed by the accumulated weight of expectation. Parents doing that specific thing parents did at departure points, talking too much to avoid feeling it. He had no parents doing that. Apollon had offered to come. He'd said no, not because he didn't want her there but because the picture of Apollon Delacour on platform 9 3/4, silver gold and light-catching and warmly proprietary, would have raised questions he wasn't ready to answer yet. She'd understood. She'd hugged him at the car and told him to use the mirror every week and slipped a small folded piece of paper into his jacket pocket that turned out, when he read it on the platform, to be a list in her handwriting, 12 things I know about you that Hogwarts will be surprised to discover. He'd smiled and put it in his trunk. Gabrielle had sent him off with a letter he'd already read 4 times and a small woven bracelet, silver thread, very fine, that sat on his left wrist and was warm in the particular way everything connected to her was warm. She'd made it herself. He wore it under his sleeve. He found a compartment near the front of the train, stowed his trunk, and sat by the window and watched the platform fill up. He was watching a harassed woman trying to manage 3 owls and a set of scales when the compartment door slid open. "Can I sit here?" "Everywhere else is." The girl stopped. She had brown bushy hair and an expression that was usually, Harry suspected, several steps ahead of where she currently was but had been temporarily derailed. She was looking at him with the slightly calculating attention of someone who recognized a face from research. "You're Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. "And you are?" "Hermione Granger." She said it the way people said names when they expected the name to establish something. Then, when it clearly didn't shift his expression, "I've read about you. In modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and, what did they say?" Harry asked, genuinely curious about what his official biography looked like from the outside. She sat down, automatically, the way people sat down when asked a question they wanted to answer. "Mostly about you-know-who and the curse. The boy who lived. The scar." Her eyes went to his forehead and then away, because she was too polite to stare and just enough self-aware to know she wanted to. Have you read all the textbooks yet?" "Most of them," Harry said. "And some that aren't on the list." Something lit up in Hermione Granger's face like a light switching on in a dark room. "Which ones?" So they talked about books for 40 minutes, which was how Harry learned that Hermione Granger was extraordinary in all the ways the educational system most rewarded, comprehensive, precise, with recall that bordered on supernatural, and also that she had a very specific blind spot, which was that she'd read everything and experienced very little of it, and so she knew that switching spells required a particular wrist rotation from reading about it but had never made something switch, and the knowing and the doing were not the same thing. He liked her. He decided this the same way he decided most things, quickly, based on accumulated evidence, without sentimentality. She was smart and she was honest about her intelligence in a way that other smart people often weren't, and she asked real questions rather than performing questions for an audience. "Have you practiced any of the spells yet?" she asked. "Yes," Harry said. "How?" She'd read, she said, that underage magic was monitored, that you couldn't practice at home. The monitoring is by location, not by person, at least until you're registered at Hogwarts, Harry said. And before you're registered, the ministry tracks incidents rather than deliberate practice because the system can't tell the difference. So if you're careful, and you know what you're looking for, there's a window. Hermione stared at him. I didn't know that. It's not in the books they give you, Harry said. I had to find it in supplementary sources. What supplementary sources? He told her about Apollon, leaving out the Veela claim, describing her as a family friend with ministry connections. Hermione absorbed this with the slightly frustrated expression of someone encountering a resource they hadn't known to look for. That's not fair, she said. Not everyone has access to. No, Harry agreed. It's not fair. But knowing it's unfair doesn't change the gap. Closing the gap does. Hermione was quiet for a moment, looking at him with the recalibrating look he was getting used to. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? She seemed to consider whether to answer honestly and decided she would. The books made it sound like you were waiting. Like you'd been kept safe somewhere until you were needed. I was, Harry said, without any particular emphasis. I'm done waiting. The train moved through green countryside and Harry watched it and ate some of his packed lunch and let Hermione eat some of her packed lunch and thought about what waiting had felt like and what done felt like in comparison, which was approximately the difference between a held breath and a good exhale. The compartment filled up later, a boy named Neville Longbottom who came in apologetically and sat with his toad Trevor cupped in both hands, worried and kind in equal measure. Harry asked him about Trevor with genuine interest and Neville relaxed degree by degree, the way nervous people relaxed when they realized you weren't going to use their nervousness against them. Ron Weasley appeared in the doorway, looked at Harry with the specific expression of someone who had been told stories about a person their whole life and was now recalibrating the stories against the actual person, and said, "Is it true? I heard Harry Potter was in this compartment." "Yes," Harry said, pleasantly. "Come in if you want." Ron came in and sat down and had a kind of cheerful, open-faced quality that Harry appreciated. He said what he thought, mostly, without the social calculation that other people his age were already learning to perform. He was also deeply opinionated about Quidditch in a way that produced the most animation Harry had seen in him, and Harry knew enough about Quidditch from his reading to make the conversation real rather than polite. 2 hours from Hogwarts, the door slid open again and this time it was a boy with pale blonde hair and the particular bearing of someone who had been told since birth that bearing was important. He looked at Harry the way people looked at things they wanted and were accustomed to getting. "Harry Potter," he said, with the ease of someone who'd been rehearsing. "I'm Draco Malfoy." He said it the same way Hermione had said Hermione Granger, expecting the name to establish something. Harry looked at him. "Draco," he said. "Friendly enough. Nothing more." Malfoy waited a moment for the recognition that didn't come. Something flickered in his expression, recalculation, but he was trained to recover. He extended his hand. "I can help you, you know. Navigate. There are people you'll want to know and people you won't." Harry looked at the offered hand. He thought about what Fleur had said. He thought about Apollon's list in his trunk. He thought about a boy who'd spent 6 years learning not to perform smallness for people who wanted him small. "I think I can figure that out myself," Harry said. "Not unkind. Just certain." Malfoy's hand dropped. The recalculation became something cooler. "Suit yourself," he said, and left. Ron made a sound of approval. Hermione looked thoughtful. Neville held Trevor and said nothing, which was its own kind of opinion. Hogwarts, from the boats, was every bit as extraordinary as advertised. Harry had read descriptions of it, 3 different ones, from 3 different books, and none of them had successfully conveyed the weight of it, the way it sat against the dark sky like something that had grown rather than been built, lit from within and from the moon and from the lake below it reflecting both. He felt the magic of it from the boat, old magic, institutional magic, different in texture from Apollon's Veela warmth or the clean direct current of his own workings. It was like walking into a library that was also a cathedral that was also a living thing. He thought, I am going to learn everything this place knows." Professor McGonagall met them at the entrance with the exact manner of a woman who had done this 47 times and found it no less significant for the repetition. Harry liked her immediately, the way he'd liked Apollon immediately, because her competence was real and her directness was genuine and she wasn't performing authority, she simply had it. She looked at Harry when she went through her preparatory speech, not pointedly, not differently than anyone else, but she looked, the way someone looked when they were checking something. He met her eyes and she moved on. The Great Hall was the Great Hall, ceiling showing sky, candles floating, for tables, 500 faces turning toward the first years with the full spectrum of attention from curious to calculating to bored. Harry walked in with his yearmates and felt the eyes and the ripple of whispers starting at the Gryffindor table and spreading and didn't break his pace. The Sorting Hat was an old hat on a stool, and when it opened its brim to sing its song, Harry listened to the whole thing with genuine interest because the hat was clearly sentient and sentient entities with 500 years of institutional knowledge were worth paying attention to. They sorted alphabetically. Harry watched each student go up, watched the hat's decision time, some fast, some not, and built a picture. By the time Granger, Hermione became Gryffindor after about 40 seconds of what looked like a decent conversation, he had a rough theory about what the hat was looking for. "Potter, Harry." The hall went quiet in the particular way that silence could be its own kind of volume. He walked to the stool and sat, and the hat dropped over his ears in darkness. Then a voice, old and dry and curious, "Ah. Now here's something I haven't encountered in a while." "What specifically?" Harry thought at it. "Someone who's already decided who they are." A pause, and Harry had the sense of something large and ancient turning its attention fully toward him, which was interesting. "Most children sit down here and I'm sorting through a mess of fears and wants and half-formed notions. You, however, I'd like to know what you see," Harry thought. "If you're willing." The hat made a sound like rustling pages. "Polite, too. That's not always correlated with confidence, but you seem to have both." Another pause. "You have the mind for Ravenclaw. Comprehensive and systematic. But you're not primarily intellectual, the intellect is in service of something else." "What else?" "Agency," the hat said, and Harry had the impression it found this interesting. "You want to act. Not for glory, I'd see that, it looks different, it sparkles, for effect. You want things to change and you want to be the one changing them. That's Gryffindor at its best and occasionally its worst." "What's the worst?" "Recklessness. The inability to be patient." A beat. "Although I notice you've spent 6 years being very patient, so perhaps that's not your particular weakness." "What is?" "You trust very selectively," the hat said. "Which is sensible given your history, but in certain circumstances you might mistake caution for wisdom when really it's just armor." Harry thought about that. Fair, he thought. Yes, the hat agreed. It is. There's also something else. Something anchoring you. Outside this castle. Harry felt it probing, gently, in the direction of the warmth in his chest, and he didn't block it. Nothing to hide, not from the hat, not about this. The hat went quiet for a moment. "I see," it said finally, and its tone had shifted slightly. "Yes. I do see. That's quite something, Mr. Potter." "Which house?" Harry thought. "Gryffindor." The hat announced, and the table in red and gold erupted, and Harry took the hat off his head and handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who took it with an expression that suggested she found the sorting time, 3.5 minutes, notable, though she wasn't going to say so at the welcoming feast. He walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down and looked at his plate. Across the hall, at the staff table, Dumbledore was watching him with those sharp blue eyes, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone who had expected one answer and received something more complicated. Harry looked at his plate, not at Dumbledore, and waited for the food. He had Quirrell for defense against the dark arts by Thursday. He'd read about defense against the dark arts and he'd been looking forward to it with genuine enthusiasm, and then Professor Quirinus Quirrell walked into the classroom wearing a purple turban and a manner so determinedly nervous that it had the counterintuitive quality of something that had been practiced, and Harry paid attention for the full class and noticed three things. First, Quirrell knew his subject well. When he forgot to be nervous, in two brief unguarded moments, during a particularly interesting point about counter-jinxes, his delivery shifted. The stammer tightened. The knowledge came through cleaner. Second, there was a smell. Not strong, not obvious, just present. Old and cold and faintly chemical. Third, the back of his neck. Quirrell kept his hand at the back of his own neck, not obviously, not constantly, but when he turned away from the class his right hand would come up and touch the junction of neck and turban with the habitual unconsciousness of a man checking something repeatedly because he couldn't stop. Harry filed all three observations away and said nothing. He said nothing for 5 weeks. He paid attention every class, gave correct answers when called on, performed the expected competence of a well-prepared first year, and gathered data. He practiced in the meantime. The wand he'd received at Ollivander's, 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather, pliable the wand maker had said, with a meaningful pause, felt different from the practice wand in the way a real conversation felt different from rehearsing one. The magic came through it cleanly and quickly, like water through a wider pipe. He was ahead of his year in practical work in a way he found necessary to manage carefully. Not because he was afraid, he wasn't, but because revealing capability too early in an environment you didn't fully understand yet was strategically wasteful. Better to understand the space first. He told Hermione this in the library in the second week, when she'd noticed he wasn't raising his hand as often as he could. She'd looked at him with that expression of someone revising a position. "You're holding back," she said. "I'm choosing when to show and when to watch," Harry said. "That's the same thing." "No," Harry said. "Holding back is about fear. This is about timing." Hermione thought about this. "I think I do the opposite," she said. "I show everything immediately because I'm afraid if I don't, people will think I don't know." Harry looked at her. "You know that about yourself." "I've had a lot of time to think about my own habits," she said drily. "Not many friends." It was said lightly but it landed with the specific weight of true things said lightly, and Harry thought about Privet Drive and Colonel and the Spider being the best listener he had for a long time. "Neither did I," he said. "Until recently." "Who changed it?" Harry smiled, slightly. "Someone walked into a garden and decided I was worth knowing." Hermione looked at him with the look she had when she was trying to figure something out that wasn't in a book. She didn't ask further. He liked her for that. By the end of October he'd made a decision about Quirrell. He'd built the case carefully, not rushing, not acting on instinct alone because instinct was a starting point and not a conclusion. He'd cross-referenced the smell against his reading and found it twice, in 2 different books, both describing remnants of dark magical inhabitation. He'd noticed that Quirrell's stammer was worse on days when it rained and better on days of full sun, which seemed to suggest the thing inhabiting him was affected by light. He'd noticed that when Harry was near him, the scar on his forehead registered a faint heat that it didn't register elsewhere. He borrowed the mirror and called Apollon. He told her everything. She was quiet for longer than she usually was. "You are certain," she said finally. "About the inhabitation, yes." "About what's inhabiting him?" Harry paused. "I have a theory." "Tell me." "You told me Voldemort lost his body when the curse failed. But you also said he was never confirmed dead. Just, gone. Without a body." He paused. "If he were still alive in some form, and he wanted to come back, he'd need something. A physical anchor." "Quirrell," Apollon said quietly. "The turban. He never takes it off. The smell is strongest near the back of his head." Another silence. "Harry." "You cannot, I'm not going to do anything yet," Harry said. I'm building toward understanding what's in this castle that he wants. Because he's here for a reason. Zay third floor, Apollon said. Dumbledore made an announcement, yes? Forbidden corridor. First thing he told us, Harry said. Which tells me whatever's there is significant enough to warn about and not significant enough, in his estimation, to remove. Which means it's bait or it's a test or it's both. He heard Apollon exhale. Not the frustrated exhale of someone dealing with a reckless child but something more complicated, the exhale of someone adjusting their picture of who they were talking to. I will make inquiries, she said. Carefully. Do nothing until I won't do anything alone, Harry said. I have people here. Hermione Granger, Apollon said, with the slight amusement of someone who'd heard about her. And Neville, Harry said. Don't underestimate Neville. He told Hermione the same evening. Not everything, not Apollon, not the full extent of his preparation, but the observations. The smell. The stammer anomaly. The scar heat. He laid them out the way you laid out evidence, in order, cause and effect, inviting the intelligence across the table to stress test it. Hermione listened without interrupting, which was something she'd been working on. When he finished she sat quietly for a moment, and then she said, Defense against the Dark Arts. Lesson 7. The list of known signatures of spiritual possession. Pale skin. Involuntary twitching. Altered voice register, Harry quoted. Quirrell has all three on bad days, Hermione said. I noticed but I thought it was anxiety. What changed your mind? Nothing changed my mind, she said. I hadn't finished thinking about it yet. She tapped the table. If you're right, and I think you're right, then the question is what to do. Understand what he wants first, Harry said. Then decide. Shouldn't we tell someone? McGonagall, or, what do we tell her? Harry said. A teacher smells odd and holds his neck. She'll investigate, Quirrell will notice she's investigating, and we'll lose the advantage of him not knowing we know. Hermione was quiet. You think in advantages and disadvantages. Don't you? I think in right and wrong. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Harry said. Sometimes the right thing requires the right advantage. She looked at him. Then she looked at her book. Then she said, the third floor. Fluffy. You know about the three-headed dog? I accidentally went in there in September. I didn't tell anyone. She had the expression of someone admitting to jaywalking. It was guarding a trapdoor. Harry looked at her. She looked at him. He felt something click into place between them, not the Veela warmth, nothing like that, but the simpler and also significant click of two people agreeing, without needing to say it, to be in something together. What did the trapdoor look like? He asked. They were in the library until closing. November passed and December came in cold and sharp, and the warmth behind Harry's sternum ran its silver thread outward across the channel and came back warmer because Gabrielle had written that she was thinking about him, which he knew without reading it in any letter because the warmth did what the warmth did. He wrote to her about Quirrell in carefully imprecise language, enough to tell her something was happening, not enough to be a problem if the letter was read by the wrong person. She wrote back with the directness that hadn't changed since she was 4, be careful but not so careful that you miss your moment. You'll know when. Je t'aime. He put the letter with the others, in his trunk, under the floorboard loose enough to lift. On the 22nd of December, most of Gryffindor Tower went home for Christmas. Harry stayed. So did the Weasley twins, who were a natural disaster given human form and whom Harry respected deeply for the precision underneath the chaos. Ron stayed, cheerful and companionable. Hermione went home reluctantly, having extracted from Harry a promise to owl her immediately if anything developed. Harry used the quiet of the half-empty castle to move around it differently than he could during term, faster, more thoroughly, at hours that weren't regulated by class schedules. He went to the third floor at 2 in the morning on the 23rd with the invisibility cloak he'd received, anonymously, as a Christmas gift, which he knew was from Dumbledore, which told him several things, the most interesting of which was that Dumbledore was beginning to create conditions, setting pieces on the board, and had decided Harry was a piece worth moving. He stood in front of Fluffy, who was asleep, and looked at the trapdoor, and thought about everything Apollon had told him about Voldemort and everything he'd read and everything the Hat had said about agency. He didn't go down. Not yet. He went back upstairs and wrote 3 pages of notes. By February, Harry had the shape of it. He'd worked it out the way you worked out a proof, through elimination and logic and the 2 late-night conversations with Apollon that had pointed him at the right research. The Philosopher's Stone was in this castle. Nicholas Flamel's stone, which produced the elixir of life, which could return Voldemort to a body. Quirrell, Voldemort, was here to steal it. The elaborate series of protections below the trapdoor were the obstacle course between want and having. He sat with this knowledge for a week, turning it over. Then he sat with Hermione in the library and laid out what he knew, and she sat very still while he talked, and when he finished she said, "We need to tell someone." "Who?" Harry said. Not dismissively, genuinely. "McGonagall." Dumbledore put the stone here," Harry said. "He created the conditions for this confrontation. Which means either he knows Quirrell is coming and has a plan, or he doesn't know and can't be told without tipping off Quirrell, or," he paused. "Or this is a test. And he wants to see what I do." Hermione's expression was the one she made when she thought he was probably right and didn't want to be. "That's an enormous assumption." "He sent me my father's invisibility cloak," Harry said. "Anonymously. To a first year. During the Christmas holidays, when I was spending nights walking the castle. He let that sit. He knows, Hermione. He knows more than we know he knows. The question is whether his plan is good enough." "And your assessment?" "He didn't account for Quirrell moving this quickly. His plan has a timetable and Quirrell is ahead of it." Hermione pressed both hands to the table. "So what do we do?" "We get there first," Harry said. "Before Quirrell does. We understand every protection below that trapdoor so that when Quirrell goes, we can go after him immediately. And we stop him before he gets to the stone. 3 first years against a possessed professor and the soul of the Dark Lord." "You say that like it's a problem," Harry said. Hermione looked at him. "Most people would say it's a problem." "Most people don't know what I know," Harry said, and he wasn't performing confidence, he wasn't performing anything, he was making an accurate assessment of the variables, his 6 years of preparation, Hermione's encyclopedic knowledge, the particular warm-thread certainty that had lived in his chest since he was 5 and had never once steered him wrong. "And Neville," Hermione said. Harry had been thinking about Neville all week. "Neville's going to be extraordinary," he said. "He doesn't know it yet." "Should we tell him that?" "I think we show him," Harry said. "There's a difference." Hermione looked at her notes, then at Harry, then made the decision visibly, in the set of her jaw. "All right," she said. "We get there first. What do we need to know?" They built the map of what was below the trapdoor across 4 weeks of careful investigation, lateral thinking, and one memorable evening where Hermione identified the characteristics of Professor Sprout's devil's snare from root samples Harry had collected and Neville had then described, from memory, the precise subspecies and its aversion to both light and warmth. He'd done it quietly and completely and then looked startled when they both looked at him. "You know your plants," Harry told him. Neville held Trevor and looked at the table. "They're not impressive to most people." "You just identified the exact weakness of something that would kill us," Harry said. "That's impressive to me." Neville didn't say anything, but he sat differently for the rest of the evening. The night it happened was in June, and it moved fast. Harry had felt the heat in his scar flare sharply at dinner and looked down the staff table to the empty chair where Quirrell usually sat, and that was enough. He stood up before dessert. Hermione looked at him across the table. He nodded once. She stood up. Neville, watching them both, stood up with the resolve of someone who'd decided, quietly and without ceremony, to be brave. "Where are you going?" Ron said. "Come if you want," Harry said. "We're ending something." Ron came. The third-floor corridor, the sleeping dog, the trapdoor. Harry put Fluffy back to sleep with a conjured melody. He'd researched that, specifically, and they went down. The devil's snare released when Hermione produced light. The winged keys were a puzzle Harry untangled in 4 minutes while Ron exclaimed that it was like chess and Hermione followed the logic and Neville spotted the right key first, his plant-trained attention to fine botanical detail translating perfectly to variations in iron and rust. The chess game was Ron's. Harry had not predicted this. He watched Ron read the board in 20 seconds and start moving pieces with the calm authority of someone thinking 6 steps ahead, and thought about Fleur's voice saying be what you are and let them catch up, and understood that Ron Weasley was doing exactly that. "You're very good," Harry said. "I know," Ron said simply, moving a bishop, not boasting, just accurate. "Then, how much trouble are we in?" "Depends how the next part goes," Harry said. Ron nodded and took a knight to the face getting them through, and he sat against the wall pale and determined and said go, just go, and Harry looked at him for a moment, this open-faced boy who'd said is it true you're really Harry Potter on a train 4 months ago and was now bleeding from a chess piece and waving them forward, and felt something that wasn't the Veela warmth but was its own kind of claim, the kind that didn't need magic to operate. "We'll come back for you," Harry said. "I know," Ron said, the same way he'd said I know about the chess. The next room had the logic puzzle, potions, 7 bottles, a riddle. Hermione solved it in under 3 minutes, annotating aloud as she went, and then looked startled when Harry applauded genuinely. "Go," she said, slightly pink. "He's already in there." "You don't have to come," Harry said. "You've done more than, Harry," Hermione said. "Go." He went. Neville went with him, which Harry had not expected, and Neville looked as surprised about it as Harry did, but he'd come this far and he kept going, which was the whole definition of the thing. The last room was Quirrell. He was standing in front of the mirror of Ariste when they came in, hands pressed to the glass, and he turned, and Harry had a moment to see the two things at once, Quirrell, frightened and somehow diminished, the man beneath the possession visible in the set of his shoulders, and underneath that, looking out through Quirrell's eyes with something cold and certain, something that had been watching Harry Potter since the moment Harry Potter had become worth watching. "The boy," said the voice, and it wasn't Quirrell's, not entirely. "You shouldn't be here." "That's the second time someone's told me that this year," Harry said. "I'm starting to think it means I should be." He felt the scar blaze. He felt the warmth in his chest respond, not fighting it, running counter to it, silver and steady against the cold. Neville was a step behind him and Harry felt him trembling and not leaving, which was its own answer. Quirrell's hands were shaking. His eyes weren't entirely his own. "You can't stop this," Quirrell said, his own voice bleeding through. He's promised me, he's promised you things he can't give," Harry said. "He doesn't have a body, Professor." "What can he give you?" Something flickered in Quirrell's own expression, a crack in the possession, a moment of real terrified humanity. Harry filed it away. Then the other thing spoke again, fully, through Quirrell's face, "Show me the mirror, boy. You'll see what I need." Harry looked at the mirror of Ariste. He looked at it and thought about what he desired, what he truly desired, and he thought of Gabrielle in a garden at age 4 looking at him like she'd been looking for him, and Apollon saying you are worth choosing, and the French dictionary with the spider in the margin, and Hermione solving the logic puzzle and then going pink when he applauded, and Neville here, now, trembling and staying. He saw, in the mirror, his hand putting the stone in his pocket. He felt the weight of it settle against his thigh. Cool and smooth and very real. He understood what Dumbledore had done, the mirror that gave the stone to someone who wanted to have it rather than use it. And he understood that his wanting was clean enough. He's not getting it, Harry said. Not to Quirrell. To the thing behind Quirrell's eyes. What happened when Quirrell touched him, Harry hadn't fully prepared for: the burning, the way his skin reacted to the possession like matter-repelling antimatter, the way the warmth in his chest rose to meet it with something ancient and fierce. Quirrell screamed. The skin where he'd grabbed Harry's wrist blistered. It was over faster than it should have been. Voldemort left Quirrell's body the way smoke left a fire, upward and outward and cold, sweeping past Harry with a howl that had frustration in it rather than defeat, because this was a setback, not a conclusion, and they both knew it. Quirrell crumpled. Harry stood in the room with the stone in his pocket and the smell of dark magic fading and Neville's hand on his shoulder, gripping hard, and let out a breath. "Is he?" Neville said, looking at Quirrell. "Alive," Harry said, though barely, and it was already clear that barely wasn't going to be enough. "We need to get help." He reached into his pocket and put the stone on the edge of the mirror frame. He stepped back. He looked at it. "You're not keeping it?" Neville said. "It doesn't belong to me," Harry said. "It belongs to Flammel. And keeping it would just mean it needed defending again." He looked at Neville. "Sometimes the right move is to remove the thing everyone's fighting over." They left the room together. Behind them, the stone sat on the mirror frame and cast no reflection, which was the point. Dumbledore found them in the corridor, moving fast with McGonagall half a step behind. He stopped when he saw Harry. He looked at him the way he'd looked at him at the sorting, the expression of someone receiving a more complicated answer than the one they'd planned for. "The stone is in the last chamber, on the mirror frame," Harry said. "Quirrell needs medical attention immediately. Voldemort's spirit left through the ceiling, north wing, if tracking is possible." Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. McGonagall had already gone past them toward the trapdoor. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice had something new in it, not the warm conspiratorial tone of someone managing a piece on a board, but something more direct. "How much do you know?" "More than you planned for me to know," Harry said pleasantly. "We should probably talk about that." Dumbledore's expression did something complicated, something that had genuine assessment in it and the beginning of what might, in a wiser man, have become genuine respect. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I think we probably should." Harry nodded and walked toward the hospital wing without waiting to be told to go there. Neville walked beside him, still shaking slightly, and said, "Did we just—" "Yes," Harry said. "I'm going to be sick," Neville said. "After the hospital wing," Harry said. "You did well, Nevada." "I was terrified," Neville said. "I know," Harry said. "You did it anyway. That's the whole thing." They walked down the stone corridor, torchlight on the walls, the castle old and enormous and entirely indifferent to the small extraordinary things that happened inside it. Harry felt the warmth in his chest steady and warm and present, running its thread outward to a girl in France who didn't know yet what had happened tonight but would know soon because he was going to tell her, and he thought about what he'd tell her, not a dramatic account, not a story about himself, just the truth of it, simple: "Something tried to happen tonight and we stopped it. We're okay." She'd write back, "Of course you are, and mean it," and he'd believe it, and that would be enough. It was enough. Chapter 4, What Lives in the Walls. Summer arrived with the conviction of something that had been waiting its turn. Harry stepped off the Hogwarts Express at King's Cross on the 1st of July and found Apollon on the platform before he found the Dursleys, which was deliberate. He'd written ahead, and she'd arranged it without being asked to arrange it, which was the thing about Apollon. She understood logistics the way other people understood emotion. She was standing near the barrier in a cream-colored coat that managed to look completely ordinary and still make everyone within 20 feet unconsciously adjust their posture. Beside her was Gabrielle. She was taller. 8 years old now and taller, the silver gold hair longer and loose, wearing jeans and a blue jumper and looking at him with those pale eyes across the crowded platform with the expression she always wore when she saw him, not surprised, just confirmed, like something she'd suspected was still true. He pushed through the crowd and she closed the remaining distance and stopped in front of him. He was taller too. They assessed each other's tallness with the gravity of scientists. "You're taller," she said. "So are you." "I told you not to die," she said. "I didn't die." "I know. But you were close and you didn't tell me until afterward and I am still annoyed about this." She said it the same way she said everything, not performing annoyance, simply reporting it. Then she reached out and looked at his left wrist where the silver bracelet was, still there, still warm, slightly worn now at the edges from a year of wearing under his sleeve. "It held up," he said. "I made it well," she said, without false modesty. Behind him, Harry heard the Dursleys. He'd forgotten about them for approximately 3 minutes, which was its own kind of progress. He turned and found Vernon mid-scowl and Petunia doing her usual performance of not seeing and Dudley eating something from a bag and looking at Apollon with the expression of someone experiencing Veela proximity for the first time at the approximate developmental stage least equipped to handle it. "This is Mrs. Delacour," Harry said, pleasantly. "Family friend." Apollon smiled at Vernon in the way she smiled at people she had assessed and found wanting but was choosing to be gracious about. "Monsieur Dursley," she said warmly. "I 'ope you don't mind, Ave asked Harry to spend part of his summer with us in France. I will return him before September." This was the first Harry had heard of this. He kept his face entirely neutral. Vernon opened his mouth in the shape of a refusal and then encountered Apollon's pleasant steady gaze and recalculated, the way he always recalculated around her, the memory of whatever she'd said to him 3 years ago apparently still doing structural work somewhere in his decision-making. "Fine," he said. "Fine." "Yes." Apollon looked at Harry. He looked at her. She had the smallest version of the smile she used when she'd done something she was pleased about. He carried his trunk to the Delacour's car. The house in France was near Limoges, not a river. Gabrielle had been wrong about the river. He'd discovered on his second visit via mirror, she'd confused it with her grandmother's house, and it was large and pale and covered on the south side with a wisteria that had opinions about where it was growing and had been allowed to pursue them. The garden had a pear tree that Meal the dog still ate from with no improvement in outcomes. Harry had been here twice before in person, once at 9 and once at 10, and each time it had felt more like somewhere he was supposed to be and less like somewhere he was visiting. He knew which floorboard on the upstairs landing complained and which window in the kitchen stuck in humidity and that the good biscuits were kept in the tin that said café on it even though it contained no coffee. He knew that Gabrielle's room had maps on the walls, actual hand-drawn maps of places she'd read about, with notes in the margins in her sloping purple handwriting. He knew that Fleur's room had books stacked in structural configurations that shouldn't have worked and did, and that Apollon's kitchen at 7 in the morning smelled of coffee and something warm and the particular quality of a house where things were okay. He put his trunk in the room they always gave him, second floor, east-facing, window with a view of the pear tree, and sat on the bed and thought, 11 years old and I've spent my life in a cupboard and this is where I feel at home. He felt the warmth in his chest turn over like something comfortable and asleep. Gabrielle knocked on his door, she always knocked, and came in and sat cross-legged at the foot of the bed and said, "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Leave nothing out." So he told her. All of it, Quirrell and the smell and the observation process and Hermione in the library and Neville in the corridor and the mirror of Ariste and the burning when Quirrell's hands touched his wrists and Voldemort leaving like smoke and cold and Dumbledore in the corridor afterward. He told it the way he told her most things, straight, no performance, no softening. She listened the whole way through without interrupting. When he finished she was quiet for a moment, looking at the bracelet on his wrist. "Your magic burned him," she said. "My magic burned whoever was possessing him. The possession couldn't hold contact with me." "Why?" Harry thought about this, which he'd been thinking about since June. "The warmth," he said. "When Quirrell grabbed me, it rose. Like a response. Like a counterforce." He paused. "I think the claim did something to my magic." Your magic and mine have been, adjacent, for 6 years. I think some of what mine is has changed because of that. Gabrielle looked at the bracelet, then at him. My maman says the Veela claim changes both people. Not just the claimed. She said it's why she wanted me to meet you young. While the magic was still forming. She planned that? She says it was instinct that she followed intelligently, Gabrielle said, with the slight irony of someone quoting a parent they found impressive and slightly exasperating. Which is how maman does most things. Harry smiled. Outside the window, Meal was circling the pear tree with the hopeless optimism of an animal with no memory for consequences. Voldemort's not gone, Harry said. No, Gabrielle agreed. She said the name without flinching, the same way her mother always had, which Harry had always noticed. He'll come back somehow. He had enough intention for it. He just doesn't have a method yet. So we have time, Gabrielle said. Some. Then use it well, she said, practically, as if this were self-evident, and then, Fleur wants to talk to you about your wandless working. She's been researching it all year. She's going to be very annoying about it but also probably useful. Fleur's always useful, Harry said. Don't tell her that. She'll be insufferable. He was home. Second year started in September with a car. This was primarily Ron's fault, in the sense that it was Ron's father's enchanted Ford Anglia, and the enchanted Ford Anglia was the method by which Harry and Ron arrived at Hogwarts 2 days late because the barrier at King's Cross had sealed itself, which Harry had immediately identified as suspicious and Ron had immediately identified as an adventure. The adventure included a 300-mile flight in a flying car and the subsequent crash into the Whomping Willow, which had opinions about the car that it expressed at length and with physical force. Harry climbed out of the car with his trunk and his wand and a bruise developing along his left shoulder and stood back from the willow and thought about the barrier. It's sealed, he said. I know, I was there, Ron said, extracting himself from a broken windshield wiper. It doesn't seal on its own. It's a permanent magical structure. Harry looked at the castle above them, the lights in the windows. Someone sealed it. Why would someone seal it? To separate us from a way in. Or to force us toward a different way in. He looked at the car, which was now reversing itself indignantly into the forest. Or just to see what we'd do. Who would? Ron stopped. He had a good strategic mind when he pointed it at something other than chess and Quidditch, and Harry watched him arrive at the conclusion. You think someone knew we'd be on the platform? I think someone knew we'd be on the platform and decided to interfere with our arrival, and I think the reason is connected to whatever's in this castle this year that we haven't found yet. Ron looked at him. You're starting the year already, aren't you? I never stopped, Harry said mildly. They went up to the castle and the conversation with McGonagall about the car was the conversation about the car, and Harry took his detention and Ron took his detention and neither of them performed the expected shame because neither of them felt it. McGonagall, watching them, seemed to find Harry's particular brand of unperturbed responsibility for his own actions either admirable or infuriating and had not yet committed to which. The whispers started in October. Not the general population of castle gossip, which Harry moved through like water moves through, he heard it all and filed the relevant parts and let the rest go. Specific whispers, coming from specific places in the castle, audible to him and not apparently to anyone else. The first time it happened he was on the second floor near the bathroom and he stopped walking and tilted his head. Ron stopped beside him. What? Can you hear that? Hear what? Harry listened. The voice was moving, above him, through the stone, inside the walls, and it said something in the particular register of cold certainty he'd last heard from Quirrell's mouth that wasn't Quirrell's mouth. But different. Older and more direct and hungry. Rip, tear, kill. No, Harry said, to Ron's continued bafflement, and he stood there tracking the direction of the voice as it moved until it faded, and then he took out a piece of parchment and wrote the date and location and exact words and folded it and put it in his pocket. He wrote to Apollon that night. There's a voice in the walls of the castle. Moving through the stone. I'm the only one who can hear it. It says things like rip and tear and kill. I need to know what kind of creature communicates through stone, speaks in a way a human can hear but others can't, and presents a threat to the students in a school. Apollin's response came the next morning, with the speed of someone who'd been up most of the night. Parseltongue. You are speaking Parseltongue, Harry. This is the language of serpents. A creature that would move through the walls of a castle and speak of killing, a basilisk. A very large serpent, blind to its own reflection, whose direct gaze kills. Do not look it in the eye under any circumstances. Do not let it look at you. It is being controlled by someone. Find out who. Harry sat with this information for approximately 30 seconds. Then he thought about what Parseltongue meant, which was something he'd read about exactly once, in a supplementary text from Apollin's book Relay 4 years ago, and about what it suggested about his history with Voldemort and the particular events of Godric's Hollow. He wasn't disturbed by it. He filed it next to the phoenix feather in his wand and the warmth that burned possessing spirits and the fact that a Dark Lord's curse had reflected off him at age 1, and thought, I am made of things that don't follow the usual rules. This is just another one. He wrote back, I already know it's a basilisk. I need to know what's controlling it and who opened the Chamber of Secrets, and I need to know it before someone dies. The day after he wrote that letter, Mrs. Norris was found petrified. The school contracted into fear in the way schools contracted into fear, not all at once but in stages, each new event tightening the radius of what felt safe. More students petrified. The hallways emptying after dark. Teachers escorting first and second years in groups. The general population of Hogwarts cycling through denial and panic, and the performative bravery of people who hadn't yet been close enough to the danger to understand it. Harry moved through all of this with the quality of stillness he'd been developing since he was 5 in a garden. He heard the basilisk's voice periodically, moving through different parts of the castle, following the pipes, a serpent so large the walls hummed with its passage, and he tracked it on his parchment map of the castle, building a picture of its routes, its patterns, what drew it upward and what sent it lower. He had 3 problems, and they were, 1, finding the chamber, 2, finding who was opening it, and 3, the basilisk's eyes. A direct gaze was fatal. Indirect was petrification. He needed a method of moving through the castle with a large lethal snake that removed the eye problem entirely. Hermione solved problem 3 in the library in November, which was not surprising. She'd been working through the same list of snake-related magical entities and arrived at the reflection conclusion before he did, and came to find him in the common room with a small mirror and triumph in her face. You can see it in a reflection and it won't kill you, she said. Petrification is still a risk, Harry said. Better than death, Hermione said. Marginally, Harry said, but he wrote mirrors on his list. Problem 2 was Ginny Weasley. He hadn't been thinking about Ginny specifically as a variable until November, when he noticed that she'd been becoming progressively less herself, quieter, paler, absent from meals in ways that could be explained individually and couldn't be when you stacked them up. He noticed this the way he noticed most things, by paying attention to the shape of the absence rather than waiting for someone to name it. He found her alone in the common room at 11 on a Wednesday. She startled when she saw him. She'd been writing in a diary, a plain black diary, old and thin, not the kind of thing Ginny Weasley would have chosen, Ron's sister who wore her personality the way Ron did, visible and forward-facing. She shoved it behind the sofa cushion with a too-quick movement. Harry sat in the chair across from her. You don't have to tell me anything, he said. But I want you to know I've been watching, not in a strange way, just noticing. And I want to ask, are you okay? Ginny Weasley looked at him with the expression of someone who had been not okay for several weeks and had been waiting without knowing it for someone to ask directly rather than peripherally. Her eyes went bright. She blinked. I don't remember things, she said. Sometimes I wake up and hours are missing. Harry very carefully kept his expression steady. What were you doing when the hours were missing? I don't know. That's what missing means. Can I see the diary? Her hand moved toward the cushion and then stopped. Something in her face shifted into a battle between the part that wanted to protect the diary and the part that didn't want to protect something that was making her lose hours. The second part won, barely, and she held it out. Harry took it. It was empty. Every page, blank, which was wrong because she'd clearly been writing in it, he'd just seen her. He turned it over. T.M. Riddle in small faded letters on the inside front cover. The cold in his scar was faint but present. This is a Horcrux, Harry said quietly, and wasn't fully certain he was right until the word was in the air and the cold confirmed it. Not something he'd consciously pieced together but something that arrived fully formed from the accumulated mass of 6 years of reading and Apollin's 40-minute account of Voldemort's history. A soul fragment. An anchor. Not just a diary. Ginny stared at him. A what? Something dangerous, Harry said. Something that has been talking to you through the pages and feeding on you. He looked at her carefully. When you wrote in it, what did it write back? Her face changed. It was kind, she said, and the word came out wrong, guilty, like she already knew the kindness was wrong, had known it for a while. It listened. It was interested in everything. The castle. The teachers. It asked questions about the heir of Slytherin. Because it was the heir of Slytherin, Harry said. He put the diary flat on the table. He looked at it. He thought about Voldemort and Parseltongue and the scar on his forehead and the piece of a soul that had traveled on a curse and found a place to land and had been inside him for 11 years doing something he still didn't fully understand. He pulled his mind back to the immediate problem. The diary has been controlling you, Harry said. You've been opening the chamber. Not of your own choice, not with your own will. You were being used. He watched her face process this, the guilt and the relief of it tangled. This is not your fault. I've been, her voice broke. I've been there. I wake up with mud on my shoes and I don't, Ginny. He said her name clearly and not unkindly. I need you to stay somewhere visible and populated for the next week. Common room, dormitory, meals, nowhere alone. Can you do that? She looked at him. Then she nodded. Good. He picked up the diary. I'll handle this. What are you going to do with it? Get rid of it, Harry said. He went up to his dormitory and put the diary under his pillow and lay flat on his back and talked to the warmth in his chest for a while, not in language, just in attention. He thought about pieces of people trapped in objects. He thought about what it meant to split yourself and leave fragments behind and whether each fragment still thought it was the whole. He felt the diary under the pillow exert the faint magnetic pull of something that wanted to be opened and decided to find it annoying and go to sleep. Hermione was petrified on the 5th of December. She'd been in the wrong corridor at the wrong time with a mirror in her hand, walking back from the library, and the reflection from her small mirror had caught the edge of the basilisk's gaze, not direct, not enough to kill, but enough. They found her outside the library, still and cold, clutching the mirror and a piece of parchment she'd torn from a book. Harry stood in the hospital wing and looked at her and felt something that was not the silver warmth but had a similar absolute quality, the fierce internal stillness of someone who has decided that a situation is no longer acceptable. He looked at the parchment in her frozen hand. He carefully uncurled her fingers and took it. She'd written one word on it before she went down. One word, underlined twice, pipes. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it and pocketed it and looked at Hermione's still face and said, quietly, all right. I've got it. He spent 3 days after that doing 2 things simultaneously. In public, regular Harry Potter, attending classes, eating meals, performing normality. In private, working out the chamber's location. The pipes were Apollin's key, it moves through the walls, through the pipes, and the map he'd been building since September. He walked the castle at night with his invisibility cloak and listened for the basilisk's voice and tracked its movement and built the geometry of its underground range until the lines converged. The second-floor girls' bathroom. The out-of-order sink. The tap that didn't turn. He stood in front of it at 2 a.m. and said open in Parseltongue, not performing it, not trying to, just addressing the mechanism in the language it was built for, and the sink moved aside and the pipe shaft opened in the floor, cold air coming up from it and the smell he recognized and had learned to hate, old dark magic and stone and something animal. He stood at the edge. He went back to bed. He spent the rest of December preparing. He made himself a modified mirror rig, a pair of mirrors angled to let him see what was to his left without looking directly at it, that was small enough to wear on his wrist like an armband, Hermione's insight made physical, and tested it in the dormitory until he could navigate the room backward without bumping into furniture. He took the diary from under his pillow and kept it in a warded box he'd made from a spare textbook. He posted a Paulin a complete briefing and received back 7 pages of information about basilisk anatomy that included the one thing he needed. The creature's second fatal weapon was its venom, but its mortal enemy was the song of the phoenix. He didn't have a phoenix. He thought about what he did have instead. He thought about 6 years of wandless magic and the practice wand that had been training wheels and the phoenix feather in his wand and the burning that had destroyed Quirrell's possession. He thought about what Apollon had said about the claim changing both people's magic. He thought about Gabrielle's bracelet, warm on his wrist, and what it meant that Veela magic had chosen him before any of this had been understood. He wrote to Gabrielle, "I'm going into the chamber after the holidays. I wanted you to know before I went. Not as goodbye. Just as, I thought you should know." Her response came the next day, Christmas Eve, "I know. I felt you deciding. Come back, Harry. Not because I'm asking but because you're going to. I know the difference." He reread that twice. Then, Je reviendrai. I'll come back. I know. He put the letter in the tin box. January the 9th was a Tuesday, which seemed like a perfectly ordinary day for something extraordinary, and Harry walked into the second-floor girls' bathroom at 8 a.m. before lessons started, told Moaning Myrtle to close her eyes if she didn't want to see something interesting, and opened the chamber. He went down alone. He'd considered telling someone. He'd considered Ron, who would have come without question. He'd considered the Weasley twins, who would have also come and been an uncontrollable variable. He'd considered McGonagall, and dismissed it for the same reason he'd dismissed it in first year, not because he didn't trust her but because the chamber responded to Parseltongue and moving through it silently with one person was survivable and moving through it with a group who couldn't navigate by Serpent Tongue was not. He'd considered Neville, and dismissed it only because Neville couldn't protect himself from the eyes and the whole strategy required the mirror rig and one person using it and that person was Harry. He went down alone because it was the cleanest solution and not because he was afraid and not because he was reckless and not because he was protecting anyone. It was the right method and he knew it was the right method the way he knew most right methods, through logic and assessment, not feeling. The chamber was ancient. He'd expected that, had read about it, knew the rough history, but knowing and walking through it were different. The floor was damp stone and his footsteps were too loud and the serpent carvings on the pillars watched him with their carved eyes and he moved through it with his mirror rig up and his wand in his right hand and Parseltongue ready in his throat. The basilisk was not where it should have been. He understood this 3 seconds after entering the main chamber, the sound was wrong, the vibration in the floor absent. The chamber was empty of the snake, and standing in front of the enormous stone face of Salazar Slytherin with its open mouth was someone who was not the basilisk but was still significantly problematic. He was tall. 16 years old, maybe, and beautiful in the way old portraits were beautiful, carved and certain and perfectly composed. Dark hair. Dark eyes. A prefect's badge on his robes that said T. Riddle. "Harry Potter," said Tom Riddle. He smiled. Finally. Harry looked at him with the particular focused attention of someone who has been waiting for this meeting and is now cataloguing everything simultaneously. "You're a memory," Harry said. From the diary. Ginny's been feeding you. More than you'd think, Riddle said pleasantly. He spread his hands. I'm quite substantial now. Corporeal enough for this. He gestured at the chamber, at himself. And enough to call the basilisk. Where is it? Sleeping. Temporarily. Riddle tilted his head. I wanted to talk to you first. I've been curious about you since you survived the curse. What makes a baby powerful enough to deflect the killing curse? Love, Harry said, because that was what Apollon had told him, and it was true, and he found he didn't mind Riddle knowing it. Something moved in Riddle's expression, contempt, deeply buried under the composed surface. Love, he repeated. Lily Potter's love. A glorified sacrifice. It worked, Harry pointed out. Once, Riddle said. I've improved considerably since then. His dark eyes were very focused. You can speak Parseltongue. You have my abilities. Your abilities, Harry said, came from the night you tried to kill me. That's not a compliment to either of us. Riddle's composure adjusted. He was intelligent, extraordinary, probably, and aware of it in a way that had long since passed through pride and arrived at something colder. You could have been great, he said, and it had the quality of something he'd said before, a speech prepared. We could, no, Harry said. Simply, without anger. Riddle blinked. I haven't made my offer. The offer is join me or die, Harry said. That's the only offer you have. And I'm not joining anything, and I'm not dying today. He looked at the stone face behind Riddle. Wake the basilisk. Riddle stopped. I beg your pardon. Wake it, Harry said. You're here to kill me. The basilisk is your weapon. Stop talking and use it, because if you keep talking you're going to give me more time to prepare, and you seem intelligent enough to know that's a bad idea. Something in Riddle's beautiful composed face did something he hadn't planned for it to do, something that might, in a less controlled person, have been uncertainty. He was encountering someone who wasn't afraid of him, and that was clearly not in the speech. Then his expression cleared and he hissed, and the chamber filled with sound. The basilisk came from the mouth of Slytherin, enormous, filling the width of the chamber, scales scraping stone, movement like a river redirecting. Harry had his mirror rig up before it was fully through the opening, tracking it to his left in the angled reflection, and he moved. He moved the way he'd been moving since he was 8 in his bedroom with a practice wand, with precision, not speed, because speed without precision was just noise. He moved left and the basilisk's gaze tracked right, following sound, and he sent a blinding spell into the reflection image of its eyes and it recoiled, stunning rather than killing, and he felt the magic in him surge with the particular quality he'd first felt against Quirrell, the silver warmth rising, not aggressive but absolutely certain. Riddle was directing it. Harry could hear Parseltongue from behind him, calm and instructing. He turned and addressed Riddle directly in Parseltongue, stand down. The basilisk paused. Riddle's face did something remarkable, fractured, for just a moment, the composed certainty cracking into something raw. Harry had spoken to his own creature in his own language, which was apparently not in the preparation. Stand down, Harry said again, in Parseltongue, to the basilisk, not to Riddle. You are a living thing. You are being used as a weapon. You do not have to serve a memory. The basilisk went still. The pause lasted 3 seconds, and 3 seconds was enough. Harry turned and drove his wand hard into the diary, which he'd brought in his inside pocket and laid on the chamber floor when Riddle first appeared, and put everything he had through it. Not a standard spell. Not a textbook answer. The magic that came through the phoenix feather was hot and clean and specific, the way fire was specific when you gave it a target, and the diary burned from inside out, and Tom Riddle made a sound that had never been heard in any classroom ever and came apart at the edges and was gone before the echo of his last word had finished traveling. The chamber was very quiet. Harry stood with his wand out and his mirror rig on his wrist and looked at the ash where the diary had been. The basilisk had not moved. It was coiled at the far end of the chamber, enormous and still, its great head lowered. Harry stood in front of it. He put his wand away. He said, in Parseltongue, "You're free." The basilisk looked at him, not with its killing gaze, with the deflected gaze of a creature that understood some things without language, and then it turned and went back through the mouth of Slytherin and into whatever deep tunnel led to its deep dark home, and he heard the stone close behind it. He stood alone in the Chamber of Secrets. He stayed there for about 30 seconds, which was how long it took for the adrenaline to complete its cycle through his body and for him to register that he had a shallow cut along his left forearm from a piece of flying stone and that his shoulder ached where the Whomping Willow had gotten him in September and still hadn't fully healed. He thought about Tom Riddle saying we could be great with that prepared certainty. He thought, I already am. He walked back through the chamber. He climbed the pipe. He came out in the bathroom and found Ron and the Weasley twins and McGonagall and Dumbledore all standing in a row outside the bathroom door, which was either very good timing or someone had been watching the map. He looked at Dumbledore. "The diary is destroyed," he said. "Chamber's clear. The basilisk is alive and has been instructed to remain underground. It's a living creature and it's not naturally aggressive, it was controlled. I'd like to discuss its welfare with someone qualified in magical creatures." He looked at McGonagall. "And Ginny Weasley was being possessed by a Horcrux. She'll need support. That's not nothing, she's been carrying that since September." McGonagall made a sound that might, in other circumstances, have been the precursor to tears, and immediately converted it into the sound of someone walking with purpose toward the hospital wing. Dumbledore was looking at Harry with that expression again, the one from the corridor last year, but more of it this time. More surface area. More recalibration. "Harry," he said. "Professor," Harry said. "You went alone." "It was the appropriate method," Harry said. "If I'd been wrong, fewer people would have been at risk." Ron made a strangled noise from his left. Harry glanced at him. Ron was cycling through an expression that was approximately equal parts "Are you serious and I'm going to be sick and that's the most mental thing I've ever heard" and had landed, after the full circuit, on something that looked remarkably like the look Ron got at chess when someone made a move he hadn't seen coming but had to respect. "Next time," Ron said, "you tell me before you go into the giant snake cave." "Next time," Harry said, "let's try to avoid having a next time." "Fair," Ron said, which was the word Harry had first heard from Gabrielle's mouth 7 years ago in a garden on Privet Drive, and it landed with the same weight now, the weight of something simple and true and earned. He looked at Dumbledore, who had been very still during this exchange and was now studying Harry with an attention that had lost its comfortable assumptions and replaced them with something more honest. "We do," Harry said, "need to have that conversation." "Yes," Dumbledore said, and he meant it this time, and Harry believed him, and that was new, small and significant, like a tap that had been turned slightly on. He walked toward the hospital wing and felt the warmth in his chest pulse once, just once, the signal he'd first felt in a garden when he was 5 years old, and thought about writing to Gabrielle that evening and what he'd say. "I came back," he'd write. "Like I said." And she'd write back, "I know. I felt it when you did." And he'd believe her. Because it was true. Chapter 5, What Gets Unmasked. The Triwizard Tournament announcement came in September of Harry's 4th year, and he had opinions about it immediately. Not about the tournament itself, he'd read about the Triwizard Tournament at 12, in one of the books Apollon had sent during the relay years, and found it historically interesting in the way that things which killed a lot of people were historically interesting. Dangerous magical competition between 3 schools with 1,000 years of institutional rivalry and 1,000 years of institutional pride, resurrected after a century of dormancy by people who apparently believed that 100 years was enough time to solve the problems that had made it dormant in the first place. His opinions were about the timing. Dumbledore had spent 2 years having genuine conversations with Harry that were slowly, incrementally, becoming real. Not fully transparent, Dumbledore was constitutionally incapable of full transparency, Harry had concluded, not from malice but from the sheer calcified habit of a century of being the most intelligent person in most rooms, but honest in the ways that mattered. He'd confirmed the Horcrux theory when Harry had put it to him directly in third year. He'd acknowledged that Voldemort's return was not if but when. He'd given Harry access to 2 specific sections of the restricted library that had been unexpectedly, genuinely useful. And now, 3 weeks into 4th year, an international wizarding event at Hogwarts, a goblet of fire, and an age line that a 14-year-old could not cross. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table the night of the announcement and ate his dinner and thought about the variables. Beauxbatons was competing. Beauxbatons meant Fleur, who was 17 now and had been preparing for this for 2 years because Fleur prepared for everything for 2 years before doing it. It meant Apollon in the stands at some point, probably. It didn't mean Gabrielle, she was only 9, she'd be at home, but it meant people he knew, people who knew him, people whose presence here was either a coincidence or a convergence, and Harry didn't believe in coincidences with any real conviction. He wrote to Apollon that night, Beauxbatons is competing. I assume Fleur is entering. I'm under the age line. Tell me what you know about how the goblet selects champions. She wrote back in 2 days, the goblet selects on magical signature, intent, and suitability. It is not merely a name in a cup, it reads the person. Fleur is entering. She says she will win. She is probably right. I know something about the tournament that concerns me, Harry, and I am making inquiries. Be watchful. He was always watchful. He wrote back to say so. He told Hermione over breakfast. She'd grown into herself over 4 years in a way that was quietly extraordinary. She was still comprehensive and precise, still slightly more likely to reach for a book than a conversation, but she'd added a layer of genuine confidence that had nothing to do with grades, had come from 3 years of being right when it mattered and being trusted when it counted. She listened to his tournament concerns with her toast going cold on her plate. The age line is Dumbledore's addition, she said. It wasn't in the original tournament charter. Because he's trying to prevent a specific thing, Harry said. Someone using the tournament against an underage student. Against you. Probably. He ate his eggs. Voldemort needs a body. He needs a ritual. Most dark resurrection rituals I've read about require 3 things, a specific location, a specific object, and a specific person. Blood. Hermione set her toast down entirely. His blood or specific person, Harry said again. She was quiet for a moment. So the tournament is a container. Something with magical binding that commits a person to completion. If a champion is magically bound to finish a task, he let the sentence end where it naturally ended. Someone could engineer the task, Hermione said, arriving at it cleanly and without pleasure. Yes. She looked at the goblet, which was still burning blue-white at the front of the Great Hall, waiting for entries. The age line won't stop it if someone enters your name for you. No, Harry agreed. It won't. They looked at each other. What do you want to do? Hermione said. I want to watch the champions be selected, Harry said. And I want to see if a 4th name comes out of the goblet. And if it does, I want to know why before anyone tells me what I should do about it. Hermione picked up her toast. I'll research tournament binding magic, she said. Loopholes, specifically. Of course you will, Harry said, with genuine warmth. The Beauxbatons delegation arrived in October on a sky-blue carriage pulled by Abraxan horses the size of houses, and they arrived with the particular collective beauty of a school that had a higher-than-average Veela student population and knew it. The effect on the Hogwarts student body was immediate and mostly undignified, and Harry watched it from the entrance steps with the detached amusement of someone who had grown up adjacent to Veela warmth and had long since developed an immunity. He spotted Fleur in the 3rd row of the Beauxbatons group. She'd grown into her potential. Harry had been watching it happen incrementally over 4 years of visits and mirror conversations. The girl who'd told him be what you are and let them catch up had become someone who'd taken her own advice and run with it until the gap between her and anyone chasing was appreciable. She was tall and silver gold and carried herself with the particular authority of someone who had been told they were remarkable so often that they decided to prove it was true rather than just assume it. She was also, Harry noticed immediately, already scanning the Hogwarts student body with strategic attention rather than social attention. Not looking for attractive people or potential friends. Looking for the competition. Her eyes found him in the crowd. He raised a hand. She held his gaze for a moment, then a corner of her mouth moved, which was Fleur's version of a warm greeting from across a courtyard, and she turned back to the Beauxbatons formation. Ron was at Harry's shoulder. You know her? Fleur Delacour, Harry said. We've met. Ron stopped. He had the expression of someone recently exposed to Veela proximity at age 14, which was a significant exposure at age 14. Yes, Harry said. She is. She's also one of the most strategically intelligent people I've met, and if she enters the tournament she'll be a genuine competitor, so remember both parts. Ron looked at him with the expression of someone attempting to remember both parts and finding one of them significantly easier to hold. Fleur entered. So did Victor Crumb, Hogwarts' own Cedric Diggory, and the goblet burned and gave its 3 names on Halloween night with all the ceremony of an institution that understood its own drama. Then it burned again. The 4th name came out in the silence after Cedric's, while the applause was still settling, and Dumbledore read it with his face going carefully still in the way of a man who had been expecting a specific attack and has just confirmed its direction. Harry Potter. Harry was at the Gryffindor table and he heard his name and he didn't move immediately, which he noted was interesting, not the shock of surprise but the particular cold clarity of a confirmed theory, which felt very different in the body. He stood up. The hall was very quiet. 4 tables, 500 students, a panel of judges and teachers and the Minister for Magic, and every pair of eyes doing the same quick calculation: is this valid, is this real, is this fair? He walked to the front because the name had come out of the goblet and the goblet's magic was real and whatever it meant was going to have to be dealt with, and dealing with it started with walking forward and not with sitting and waiting to see what the adults decided to do with him. He handed his name slip, which he hadn't submitted, which anyone who'd been within 10 feet of him since Halloween could confirm, to Dumbledore and said, quietly, so only Dumbledore could hear, I didn't put my name in. Dumbledore looked at him over the half-moon glasses with an expression that had moved past its original surprise into something sharper. I know, he said, equally quiet. Do you know who did? Not yet. We should find out quickly, Harry said. Before the first task. Dumbledore looked at him, this 14-year-old who had stopped a soul fragment and a basilisk and was currently treating the activation of a binding magical contract against his will as a logistical problem to solve, and said, yes. I believe we should. He wrote to Apollon that night from the champion's waiting room, while Fleur was on one side of him practicing a complicated spell in an undertone and Crumb was on the other side being impressively still and Cedric was across the room wearing an expression of earnest anxiety that Harry found genuinely sympathetic. My name came out of the goblet. I didn't enter it. Someone did it for me. The binding is active, I'm a champion. I need everything you know about who might want me bound to this tournament and why. Her response came at 6 in the morning, I have a name. Bartemius Crouch Jr. Son of the head of magical law enforcement, supposed to be dead, was not. He is an extremely loyal follower of Voldemort, among the most loyal, the kind of loyalty that is also madness. If he is alive and free and present at Hogwarts, he is here to deliver you to a ritual. I believe he is disguised. Find who is new at Hogwarts this year who was not there last year. Harry read this twice. Then he looked up at the ceiling of the champion's room and thought about the new defense against the dark arts teacher, Alastor Moody, retired Auror, famous and decorated, who had arrived with one magical eye and one real one and a paranoia that had the quality of genuine expertise rather than affectation. He thought about Apollon's word, disguised. He thought about Polyjuice Potion, which he knew about from second year in a personal and direct way, and about what a convincing disguise required and how long it could be maintained and what the cost of maintaining it for months would be. He wrote back, "I think it's Moody. Or rather, someone using Moody's face. I'll be careful. Don't tell Gabrielle yet." A pause in the correspondence, longer than usual. Then, "She already knows something is wrong. She asked me this morning why you felt far away." He sat with that for a moment. The warmth in his chest was still present, always present, 9 years of it now, grown from the thin new thread it had been in a garden on Privet Drive into something deep-rooted and structural, like a tree you stopped noticing because it had always been there. Far away was the right word for what he felt, actually. Not distant from Gabrielle, never that, but stretched. Like the thread was under more tension than usual. "Tell her I'm all right. Tell her I have it. She will want to hear that from you." He put down the quill and picked up the mirror. The first task was dragons. Harry had found out via Hagrid the week before. Hagrid's affection for dangerous creatures extended to accidentally introducing champions to their tasks, which Harry felt was probably not the tournament's intended design but was practically useful. He'd had a week to prepare, which was not enough time to become a dragon expert but was enough time to become specifically prepared for a horntail specifically, which was different. He didn't do the summoning charm. He'd considered it, Hermione had suggested it, correctly, and it would have worked. But the goblet's binding magic meant that the tasks had to be completed with genuine engagement, not resolved with the most efficient route, and Harry had read enough about the binding to know that a too quick completion would satisfy the letter but not the spirit, and the spirit was where the magic held. He flew instead. Not a broom he'd summoned, his firebolt, which he'd gone to get himself before the task began, because preparation was not cheating, preparation was preparation. He flew the horntail on his terms and took the egg on his terms and did it with the kind of clean specific precision that didn't look like showing off because it wasn't showing off, it was the logical result of 9 years of paying attention. He came down from the task with the egg under his arm and a burn along the outside of his left hand from a flame that had caught when he'd slowed to look back. He'd slowed because he'd noticed the nesting behavior, noticed the horntail was not aggressive but protective, and he'd taken the egg gently rather than snatching it, which was both strategic and true to how he actually felt about a creature doing what creatures did. The crowd was extremely loud. He heard it from a distance, the way he heard crowds, as a phenomenon rather than an experience. Fleur was second. She'd put the horntail to sleep and moved through it with an efficiency that was beautiful to watch, and Harry told her so afterward in the champion's tent, and she looked at him with the expression she used when she wasn't sure whether to accept a compliment or analyze it for ulterior motive. "You flew well," she said finally. "Unnecessarily theatrical, but well." "It wasn't theatrical," Harry said. "I took the egg carefully because she was nesting." Fleur's expression shifted from competitive assessment to something more genuine. "You noticed that?" "Obviously." "Most people didn't," she said. "Most people were thinking about the egg." Fleur looked at him for a moment, then at her scores, then back. "My maman sends her regards," she said. "She said to tell you she has been making inquiries." "I know." She wrote. "She is frightened," Fleur said, which was remarkable because Fleur saying frightened about Apollon was the equivalent of anyone else saying apocalyptically concerned. "Not for herself." "I know," Harry said again, gently. Fleur looked at him with the full version of her attention, the one she didn't give most people. "You're being careful?" "Always." "No," she said, with sudden precision. "That is not the same as careful. You are being strategic. Careful is different. Careful means you value your own life at least as much as the outcome." "Do you?" He opened his mouth and she pointed at him. "Do not say yes if you don't mean it," she said. "I will know." He thought about it honestly. He thought about the chamber, going alone. He thought about this task and the horntail and the burn on his hand. He thought about Gabrielle's bracelet on his wrist and the warmth that had run its thread through 9 years of his life. Yes, he said. I do. She held his gaze for a long moment. Good, she said, and turned back to her notes. Between the first and second tasks, two things happened that changed the shape of the year. The first was the Yule Ball, which was a social event, which meant Harry approached it the way he approached social events, as an interesting study in how people moved and what they revealed when they thought they were relaxing. He went with Parvati Patil, who was kind and good-humored and had no illusions about the arrangement, and they reached an understanding over punch that the ball was an experience to enjoy and not a romantic situation to navigate, which suited both of them. He danced one dance with Fleur. It was the product of her appearing beside him during a song and saying, "You can dance," and Harry saying, "Adequately," and Fleur saying, "Then adequately will do," and pulling him onto the floor with the practicality of someone who had made a decision and was implementing it. She danced the way she did everything, precisely, with complete awareness of the space she occupied and the space others occupied relative to her. Harry matched her tempo and she raised an eyebrow. "Better than adequately," she said. "Apollon made me take lessons at 10, he said." She said it was a life skill. "It is," Fleur agreed. "She is right about most things." "I know." They turned once. Across the floor, Hermione was dancing with Victor Crumb and managing to look both genuinely happy and slightly surprised about the genuinely happy, which Harry found satisfying. She deserved to be genuinely happy. She worked harder than almost anyone he knew. "Gabrielle asks about you in every letter," Fleur said, conversationally. "I know. I write to her. She says you've started writing about Voldemort in your letters." "Not carefully. Just directly." "She's old enough," Harry said. "She's 9. She's known his name since she was 5, Harry said. Apollon told her. She doesn't need protection from information. She needs context for it." Fleur considered him. "You sound like my mother." "I've had 9 years of your mother," Harry said. "Some of it was bound to stick." The corner of Fleur's mouth moved. "She loves you, you know. Maman. Not as a project. She loves you." She said it the way she said things that were difficult, directly, without decoration. "In the way she loves us." Harry missed a step. "Just barely. Just one." "I know," he said, and it was the third time he'd said "I know" in this conversation, but this time it came out differently, softer, and real, and with the texture of something he'd understood for a long time and rarely said aloud. Fleur nodded once, satisfied, and that was the end of the conversation because the song ended, and she walked back to her table and Harry walked back to his and found Ron at his elbow saying something about Crumb, and Harry let the words flow past him and stood for a moment in the middle of the Yule Ball just feeling it. The family he'd built. The warmth. The thread. The second thing was finding Bartemius Crouch Jr. Harry didn't find him dramatically. He found him the way he found most things, through accumulated evidence arriving at a conclusion. The behaviors he'd been tracking since October, Moody's movement patterns, the moments when his magical eye tracked in directions that didn't match the physical conversation he was having, the 2 occasions where his voice had shifted almost imperceptibly in register. The fact that 3 times over the term, Harry had felt a cold prickling at the back of his neck in Moody's proximity that had a specific quality to it, not the Voldemort scar heat, but the particular atmosphere of unforgivable magic, residual and faint. He brought this to Dumbledore in January, laid out the same way he laid out everything, in order, with sources. Dumbledore listened. He was quiet for a long time when Harry finished. "You're certain," Dumbledore said. "I'm certain enough to bring it to you," Harry said. "I can't verify Polyjuice without access to Moody's office and I'm not breaking into a teacher's office without your knowledge." Another pause. "That's an interesting qualification." "I'm not reckless," Harry said. "I just have a different threshold for what constitutes necessary action." Dumbledore looked at him over his glasses. "Harry. If this is correct, the real Moody is being held somewhere in the castle," Harry said. Probably in his own trunk. Polyjuice requires a continuous supply of the person being imitated. He's been here since September, Moody has been here since September, the fake has been here since September, which means the real one has been kept here for months. He paused. That's the priority. Find him. It was, ultimately, McGonagall who found him. Harry had not been entirely honest about not breaking into teachers' offices, in the sense that he'd provided Dumbledore with enough specific information about the probable location of the concealment that the search was pointed and efficient. The real Alastor Moody was in the bottom compartment of his own trunk, alive and barely, and Bartemius Crouch Jr. was revealed when the Polyjuice wore off at midnight under the effect of Veritaserum and the combined observation of Dumbledore and 3 Aurors. Harry was not in the room for this. He was in the Gryffindor common room when it happened. He knew it had happened because the warmth in his chest lost some of its tension, the background noise of threat dropping slightly, and because Hermione knocked on the boys' dormitory door at 2 in the morning and said through the wood, "They found him." "I know," Harry said. "Go to sleep, Hermione." A pause. "How did you know?" "I just did." A longer pause. "You're very strange, Harry." "Yes," he said. "Good night." The second task was in February, and Harry solved the golden eggs riddle in November. An hour-long screeching noise under water became a mournful human voice, a song, a clue about something taken, and by December he'd understood it meant something taken from each champion, something valued, and by January he'd begun to understand that the something for him was going to be a person. He thought about who they'd take. He ran the list: Ron, Hermione, Neville, Fleur if she was a champion and not taken, and then stopped running the list because he understood who they'd take for him, specifically, the one that the tournament's magic would identify as most valued, the thread that ran from his chest outward to France, and he sat very still with that understanding and felt the warmth pulse. He wrote to Apollon, for the second task, the thing taken, "I think it will be Gabrielle. I don't know how they'd get her here. I don't know if the tournament's magic would reach across the channel for her. But I need you to know that it's a possibility." Apollon wrote back in 6 hours, "Harry. Listen to me. If it is Gabrielle, the hostages are safe during the task, they are enchanted to be in a stasis, they cannot be harmed by the water or the cold. You retrieve her and you bring her up and she will be perfectly fine. But, if it is her, she will feel it when you find her. The claim, when you're close, she will feel it even through the stasis. You understand?" He understood. He wrote, "Yes." "One more thing," Apollon wrote. "The gillyweed that Neville told you about, use it. It's the right solution. This is not a time for wandless magic in open water with a time limit." He smiled at that. She knew him well enough to anticipate the impulse toward the harder route. He wrote, "Fine." "Fine," she wrote back, and he could hear her voice in it. February 24th was cold in the way that February was cold at Hogwarts, sharply, comprehensively, in a way that made the Black Lake look like something out of a story you wouldn't want to be in. Harry stood at the edge of the lake with the other champions and the gillyweed in his hand and the crowd in the stands and the task beginning. He swallowed the gillyweed. The transformation was unpleasant, he'd read about it and reading didn't prepare you for gills opening in your neck, and then he was in the water and the cold was somewhere outside him and he was moving, fast, following the warmth. That was the thing he hadn't expected, the warmth directed him. The thread that ran outward from his chest became a compass below the surface of the lake, pointing toward what the tournament's magic had taken, and he followed it with his eyes open and the lake's dark water closing around him and Grindylows occasionally requiring a pointed wand. He found them in the underwater village of the Mere People, the hostages arranged in the water like some kind of terrible still life, Ron first, then Hermione, then a Beauxbatons boy he recognized as a 7th year, then, Gabrielle. She was smaller than the others, floating with her silver gold hair spread around her like something from a painting, her eyes closed, entirely still, entirely unafraid looking, and the warmth in his chest didn't spike the way he'd expected it to spike at finding someone in danger. It deepened instead. It settled and deepened and he was at her side in 3 strokes, and the moment his hand touched her arm she moved. Not awake, still in stasis, still, but her hand turned in his grip and her fingers closed around his fingers with the automatic certainty of someone who knew exactly who was holding them. She'd felt him. Through the stasis, through the water, through the enchantment, she'd felt him. He took Ron with his free hand. He looked around. Hermione's champion was coming, he could see him in the distance, and the Beauxbatons boys' champion would come, but the merperson guarding the hostages made a sudden harsh sound, gesturing urgently, and Harry understood, time limit, move. He moved. He surfaced with both of them, Ron gulping air and disoriented, Gabrielle still unconscious but breathing fine, just enchanted still. He pulled them both to the bank. He lay on his back on the shore of the Black Lake in February with Gabrielle's hand still in his and listened to the crowd and Ron's coughing and the merpeople beneath the surface and felt the thread between himself and the small 9-year-old girl from France settle back into its usual warmth, easy and permanent and uncompromised. Her eyes opened. She looked up at the sky, then at the crowd, then at him. Her silver hair was soaked and dark with water and she was 9 years old and had just spent an hour enchanted at the bottom of a Scottish lake, and she looked at him with those pale eyes and said, with the composure of someone who had woken up in stranger situations than this, "Hello, Harry." "Hello, Gabrielle." "I was at the bottom of a lake," she said. "You were." "I felt you," she said. Not a question. Just a report of what had happened. "I know," he said. She sat up, still holding his hand, and looked at the lake and the crowd and the other champions coming in at various points along the shore, and then she looked back at him. "Are you hurt?" "Not significantly." "Good." She squeezed his hand once, firmly, the way Apollon gripped things when she was making a point, and then she released it and started wringing lake water out of her hair. "This tournament is ridiculous," she announced to no one in particular. Harry laughed. It came out loud and genuine and he was surprised by it, the way he was sometimes still surprised by laughter, and Ron, recovered enough to be sitting up and noticing things, looked at him and then at Gabrielle and back at him with an expression of dawning comprehension. "This is the girl from the mirror," Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. Ron glanced at Gabrielle, who was examining her own wrist where a graze had formed from the merperson's enchantment, entirely unbothered. "She's basically you," Ron said, slightly awed. "Like a small French you." "She'd find that comparison insulting," Harry said. "I find it insulting," Gabrielle said, without looking up from the graze. "Harry is a tall English me." Ron stared. Then he started laughing, and Harry laughed again, and somewhere in the stand someone was calling Gabrielle's name and Apollon was going to be at the shore in approximately 30 seconds, having used whatever method she'd used to get from the stands to the shoreline that fast, and the tournament judges were doing tournament things with scoring, and the world was about to be complicated and loud. Harry sat on the shore of the Black Lake in February. Everything was still. Then Apollon arrived and Gabrielle went to her and Apollon held her daughter with the particular grip of a parent who had spent an hour watching their child at the bottom of a lake, and Harry stood and gave them the space of it, and then Apollon's arm extended and pulled him into it too, her hand on the back of his head, and he stood there in the February cold in a 3-person hug on the shore of a Scottish lake and didn't move away. "The third task," Apollon said, her voice even, measured, a little tight. "We need to talk about the third task." "I know," Harry said. "Before the third task," she said, "I am going to tell you something I've been deciding whether to tell you." He pulled back enough to see her face. Her expression had the quality he'd learned to read over 9 years of her face, the expression she wore when the information was important and the timing wasn't ideal, but the timing was what existed. "Tell me," he said. She looked at him, and at Gabrielle, and at the lake. "Bartemius Crouch Jr., she said quietly. "Before was captured. Spoke, under Veritaserum. Dumbledore has shared what is useful." She met his eyes. "Ze ritual Voldemort needs. We were right about ze blood." Zay location is a cemetery, Godric's hollow, we believe. Zay object is a bone. Zay third thing, is blood, specifically, is not enough. What is required is willing sacrifice. Or Ze next closest thing. What's the next closest thing? Harry said. Someone goes willingly into Ze trap, she said. Someone enters Ze maze and reaches Ze cup and takes it and is taken in turn. Ze port key only works because Ze person chooses to take Ze cup. Ze choice is Ze sacrifice. Harry stood very still. So, he said. The third task is the trap. Yes. And if I don't enter the maze, Ze binding, Apollon said. Ze tournaments binding magic. If you do not compete in Ze third task, Ze magical contract, she paused. I've been trying to find a way around it. And? Her expression answered before she did. Right, Harry said. He looked at the lake. He looked at the still distant figures of the other champions. He looked at the cup's reflection in the water in his mind, the port key, the trap, the willing enough sacrifice that wasn't quite willing. Then I go in knowing, he said. Harry, the difference between walking into a trap blindly and walking in with your eyes open is preparation, he said. I've been preparing for Voldemort since I was 8 years old. If it has to happen, he paused. If it has to happen, I would rather it happen on my terms. Apollon looked at him for a long moment. Her pale eyes were very clear and very direct and had the quality they always had, not pity, not the inventory of his shortcomings, but the full unedited assessment of what he was. Then we prepare, she said. You and I, properly. For everything. I'll need to know every detail of the ritual, Harry said. I will tell you everything I know. And I need a way to interrupt it without being killed first, Harry said. Which is a harder problem. Yes, Apollon agreed. It is. They stood on the shore of the Black Lake and the February cold moved around them and behind them Gabrielle was sitting on a rock wringing out her hair and watching the lake, and Harry thought about everything that was coming and felt it clearly, without fear, the way you felt a storm coming when you were standing inside a house you'd built with your own hands and knew every brick of. I'm not dying in a cemetery, Harry said. Not as bravado. As a plain fact, assessed and committed to. Apollon's expression did what it had done the first time he'd walked into her kitchen at 9 years old and told her about Vernon hitting him, that particular thing that wasn't pity and wasn't grief and was something older and more certain than either. Non, she said. You are not. Behind them, the scores were being announced. The crowd was doing what crowds did. The world was turning in its usual direction. Harry turned to face it. Chapter 6, What was always true. The maze went up on the 24th of June. Harry stood at the entrance with the other 3 champions and looked at the hedges, 20 feet high, solid black, already moving slightly in the way of things that were alive and interested, and thought about preparation. He'd had 4 months of it. 4 months of Apollon's detailed correspondence and 3 visits in person, conducted at the Delacour house in France under the cover of a school exchange program that Dumbledore had arranged with the particular efficiency of a man who understood that certain things were happening whether he arranged them or not and had decided to arrange them neatly. 4 months of Fleur drilling him on countercurse theory in the garden while Gabrielle watched from the pear tree and occasionally corrected Fleur's Latin pronunciation, which Fleur found insufferable, and Apollon made notes in the kitchen. 4 months of understanding, with increasing precision, what was waiting for him beyond the maze. He knew the ritual. All of it, the bone, the flesh, the blood, the incantation. He knew the cemetery's geography from Apollon's French ministry contacts who had access to British property records. He knew that the Portkey Cup would deposit him in Little Hangleton and that Wormtail was the other actor in the ritual and that Voldemort's current form was something between alive and not, dependent, parasitic, waiting. He knew that the ritual would complete in under 4 minutes if uninterrupted and that interrupting it required being free to move, which meant not being bound to a headstone, which meant the 4-second window between landing and Wormtail getting organized was the window that mattered. He knew, from 2 evenings in Dumbledore's office with his hand flat on the pensive surface, what Voldemort looked like in the interim body, the infant terrible creature, pale and terrible, that Bertha Jorkins had seen before she died. He'd looked at it in the memory without flinching because flinching wasted energy he needed elsewhere. He knew, from Apollin's most recent letter, delivered by a French owl that morning at 6, the ritual requires the blood to be taken, not given. He cannot take it if you do not give him the chance. Trust the 4 seconds, Harry. Trust yourself. He'd read that letter 4 times. He had it in his pocket now, along with the silver bracelet from his wrist. He'd taken it off this morning and put it in his pocket because he didn't want it damaged, which was either sentimental or strategic and was probably both. He looked at the maze. Fleur was to his left, her jaw set, her silver gold hair back in a severe braid. She looked at him sideways and he looked back. She'd been briefed, not fully, not the whole picture, but enough to know that Harry's third task was a different order of problem than hers, and enough to respond to that knowledge the way Fleur responded to everything, which was by researching until she understood it and then refusing to find it anything other than solvable. "When you come out of the maze," she said, low, not a question. "When," he confirmed. Her jaw moved. "Don't make me a liar," she said. "Never," he said. The cannon fired and he went in. The maze was a problem set. He moved through it the way he moved through most things, tracking variables, eliminating options, keeping his feet moving because stopping to think was for people who hadn't already done the thinking. A boggart in the first junction took the form of a vast darkness with his own voice coming from inside it, which was abstract and slightly pretentious, and he dispersed it with a ridiculous before it had time to develop a personality. A sphinx in the eastern corridor asked him a riddle about fire and time and he answered it in under a minute because Hermione had made him read a book of classical riddles in March just in case, which had seemed excessive at the time and was now the most sensible thing anyone had ever done. He heard the Cruciatus from somewhere in the northern section, a scream, and then silence, and then the red sparks of someone calling for extraction, and he turned toward it automatically before catching himself. Someone needed help. The rational weight of what was coming balanced against the immediate human weight of a scream. He turned north. It took 3 minutes to find her, Fleur, sitting against a hedge wall with her wand in her hand and her braid half undone, a cut along her cheekbone and the tight expression of someone managing pain with a dignity that would not negotiate. She looked up when she heard him and the dignity relaxed fractionally. "Acromantula," she said, before he could ask. "I handled it. I then encountered Z Boggart." She paused. Z Boggart was, I needed a moment. "What was it?" he said. She looked at him steadily. "Gabrielle," she said. "At the bottom of the lake. Not breathing." He held that for a moment. "She's fine." "I know," Fleur said. "Boggarts do not traffic in things you know. They traffic in things you feel." He helped her up. Her ankle was turned, not badly, but enough. She tested weight on it with a flat expression. "Go," she said. "You can't walk properly." "I can produce sparks perfectly properly," she said. "Go, Harry. We both know where you need to be." He looked at her. She looked at him with Apollin's eyes in Fleur's face, that pale precise gaze that didn't comfort and didn't coddle and believed, simply and completely, that he was capable of what he was about to do. "Sois prudent," she said. "Be careful." Not the careful she'd challenged him about at the Yule Ball. Real careful. The kind that valued your own life. "I will," he said. He left her with her wand and her dignity and ran. The cup was at the center of the maze, standing on a plinth in a clearing ringed by still hedges, gold and ordinary-looking and emanating the faint magical signature of a port key he could feel from 10 feet out. It looked like a trophy. It looked like a reward. It looked like nothing about it would take him to a cemetery. He walked up to it. He stood in front of it and looked at it and thought about everything he knew, the ritual, the 4 seconds, the headstone, Wormtail's wand in his right hand, the incantation, and thought about Apollon saying trust yourself and Gabrielle in the February lake, her hand closing around his fingers with that automatic certainty. He thought, I'm not dying in a cemetery. He picked up the cup. The world dissolved. The cemetery appeared the way Portkey destinations appeared, sudden, total, the ground under his feet going from soft grass to uneven ground in an instant, and he was already moving before the nausea of transit had finished. 4 seconds. He rolled left before he'd fully oriented, which put him behind the nearest headstone before Wormtail had raised his wand, and he heard the stuttered intake of breath that meant surprise and used it. He came up fast with his own wand out and said Expelliarmus and Stupefy in the same breath, overlapping, and Wormtail's wand left his hand and Wormtail's consciousness left his body and Wormtail hit the ground of the cemetery in Little Hangleton with the inelegant finality of a man who'd had exactly 4 seconds less than he needed. The bundle in Wormtail's arms hit the ground too. Harry stood over it. Voldemort's interim form looked exactly like Dumbledore's memory, the infant terrible shape, pale and malformed and entirely terrible, looking up at Harry with red eyes that were ancient and furious and aware. It made a sound. Not a word, not yet, it hadn't had a voice in 3 years, the voice was one of the things that came back with the body, but the intent was clear in the eyes. No, Harry said, to the eyes, to the intent, the way he'd said no to Riddle in the chamber 6 years ago. Not performing it. Just accurate. He stood with his wand on Voldemort's interim form and thought about what came next. He could destroy it. The question was whether he should. He'd thought about this, had thought about it for months, turning it over the way he turned over every important problem. Not the tactical question, which was clear enough. The moral question. Voldemort's interim form was not dead. It was not nothing. It was a person who had made 1,000 choices to become what it was, each choice deliberate, each one a step away from the thing that was human and toward the thing in the cemetery grass. It was also a person who would, if given the chance, murder him and every person he loved and have no thoughts about it. He thought about Tom Riddle in the chamber saying we could be great with that prepared speech and the cold beneath the composure. He thought about Gabrielle at the bottom of a lake with her hand in his. He made his choice. He summoned Wormtail's wand from the ground, it was a simple motion, wandless, barely effort, and he put it in his left hand and he knelt and looked at the thing in the grass and said, very quietly, you should know that I came here knowing what this was. I came knowing your plan. You didn't catch me, and you didn't trap me, and what happens next is my choice. The red eyes were very still. I'm not destroying you, Harry said. Not because I can't. Because I want you to be conscious when you're handed to the Aurors, and I want you to spend whatever comes next knowing that the 15-year-old you tried to trap in a maze said no. He stood up. He produced a containment vessel from his inside pocket, not a jar, not a box, something Apollon had made with specific magical properties that she'd spent 2 weeks in March constructing from a theory in a book so old it was held together with pure stubbornness, and he used both wands to complete the binding and the interim form of Lord Voldemort went into the vessel and the vessel sealed and Harry stood in the cemetery in Little Hangleton holding it. The silence was complete. It was the particular silence of a plan working. He looked around at the cemetery, the headstones, the night sky, the open gate at the far end leading to a road. He looked at Wormtail, unconscious on the ground. He reached into his pocket and found the silver bracelet and put it back on his wrist, where it warmed immediately, and he stood in the cemetery and felt the thread in his chest go loose with relief, long and complete, a 9-year tension discharging. Then he went back to the maze. He touched the cup, home, he thought at it, Hogwarts, and the portkey complied. He came out on the lawn in front of the maze, where the stands were full and the audience was watching the hedges and the air had the quality of a crowd that had been waiting long enough to stop trusting that waiting was going to resolve it. He came out standing upright, holding the containment vessel in his right hand and Wormtail's wand in his left, and the crowd noise started at a specific pitch, the pitch of people seeing something they didn't have immediate words for, and he walked toward the judge's table with the even pace of someone who had somewhere to be. Dumbledore met him before he reached the table. He was moving fast for a man his age, half-moon glasses catching the floodlights, and he looked at Harry's face and then at the vessel and then at Harry's face again, and his expression was the expression Harry had last seen in the corridor after first year, that recalibrating look, but with more of it than ever, more surface area, something that had finally let go of its original calculations and was running new ones. "Harry," he said. "It's done," Harry said. He held out the vessel. "Voldemort's current form. Wormtail is in the cemetery, Little Hangleton, unconscious. I'd send someone quickly before he comes round." He paused. "Bartemius Crouch Jr. needs to be questioned again. He knows where the other followers are." Dumbledore took the vessel. He looked at it. He looked at Harry. "You went in knowing." "Yes. I didn't tell you, Apollon told me," Harry said. "And I would have preferred if you'd told me, but that's a conversation for another night." He looked at the vessel in Dumbledore's hands. "Right now you need Aurors in that cemetery and you need Fudge to see that thing before he spends the next year telling people it doesn't exist." McGonagall was at Dumbledore's shoulder now, and Harry looked at her and she looked at him with an expression that had given up on finding him surprising and had arrived somewhere beyond that, somewhere that was just seeing him the way he was. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No," he said. "That's not an answer I'd accept from most students," she said. "I know," he said. "It's still the answer." Her mouth moved. It might have been the beginning of a smile, brief and professional and not performed for anyone. She turned to Dumbledore and said, "I'll contact the Auror office." Harry stood on the lawn while things happened around him, officials moving, Fudge's voice raised in the background doing the particular honking it did when he was confronted with something that complicated his position, the other champions emerging from the maze at various points, Cedric in the south and still upright, Ron and Hermione appearing from somewhere in the stands with expressions that did everything expressions could do. Ron hit him in the shoulder the way Ron expressed strong emotion. "Hard enough to register, not hard enough to mean anything except you absolute idiot, I'm glad you're alive." "You could have told me the plan," Ron said. "The plan required me to go alone," Harry said. "The plan was mental," Ron said. "It worked." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Hermione said, which was so close to what Harry had said to her 4 years ago in the library about right and wrong that he looked at her sideways and she looked back without apology. She'd been crying, recently, not now, the evidence was historical, the brightness in her eyes and the slight redness, and she looked at him with the expression she used when she had too many things to say any of them. "I know," Harry said, to her expression. She pressed her lips together and looked away and then looked back. "You could have told me," she said, which was the same thing Ron had said but came from a different place. "I know," he said again. "I'm sorry." She nodded, accepting the apology with the efficiency of someone who'd already processed it, and then she said, "Apollon's here. She arrived 20 minutes ago. She's been with the Beauxbatons staff and I don't think she's been looking at the maze." "She'd have been looking at the thread," Harry said, without thinking. Hermione looked at him. "The what?" "I'll explain later," Harry said. Apollon found him at the edge of the crowd, which was how she always found him, by knowing where the edge would be. She looked the same as she always looked, which was to say extraordinary, except that her usual composure had been through something tonight and the evidence was in her hands, which were not quite still. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him across a garden gate when he was 5 years old. Taking inventory. Finding nothing missing. Then she pulled him into a hug and held on, and he stood in it the way he stood in her hugs now, not figuring out the mechanics of it, not processing it from a distance, just present in it, which had taken years to learn and was worth every year it had taken. "Bien," she said, into the top of his head. "Good. Good. I told you," he said. "You told me," she agreed. She stepped back and held his face in her hands the way she'd done since he was 9 and she'd had to crouch to do it, and looked at him. "They vessel? With Dumbledore. The Aurors have Wormtail." Her eyes moved across his face, checking the specifics. "You offered him the choice," she said. "Before you bound him." "Not a question." "Yes." "He didn't take it." "He didn't have words yet." But the eyes said no. He paused. "I needed him to know it was my choice." Apollon made a sound, something between a sigh and something more complicated. "You are," she said, "the most remarkable person I know." "You know Fleur," Harry said. "I know Fleur," Apollon agreed. "You are both remarkable." "Don't tell her I said so in those words, she'll be impossible." He smiled. Behind her, he saw Fleur coming across the lawn, ankle-wrapped, leaning slightly, being escorted by a Beauxbatons professor who was clearly doing more work than Fleur was allowing him to do. She was scanning the crowd, and when she found Harry she straightened, despite the ankle, despite the cut on her cheekbone, and something in her face resolved from worry into the Fleur version of relief, which was a brisk nod and the resumption of walking. She stopped in front of him. "You're late," she said. "The maze was large," Harry said. "I've been out for 40 minutes. "You were also helped out," Harry said. "I note the difference." Her chin lifted. "My exit was dignified." "Very," he said, honestly, because it had been. She looked at him, the cut on his forehead, the containment vessel no longer in his hands, the wand in his pocket. "It's done," she said, low. "It's done." Something passed over her face too quickly to fully name. Then she reached out and pressed her fist briefly to his shoulder, not Ron's hit, something different, a fist held there for 2 seconds and then withdrawn, and said, "Good. Now someone should probably tell Gabrielle before the prophet does." "I know," Harry said. "I'll call her tonight." "She's been awake since this morning," Fleur said. "She felt you leave for the maze." He thought about that. 9 years of the warmth, of the thread, and it had never stopped being extraordinary. "I know," he said, and looked at his wrist where the bracelet sat, warm and quiet and present. That night, after the Aurors and the Ministry and Fudge's very loud 3-hour process of being confronted with evidence he didn't want to accept, after the school had contracted into the specific hush of a place where something significant had happened and the air hadn't finished carrying it yet, Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room with the mirror in his hand. The fire was low. Everyone else was in bed. He said her name. The mirror fogged and cleared, and Gabrielle's face appeared, not the frosted glass impression of early years but a real clear image, the mirror having been upgraded twice since he was 8, and he could see her, pale eyes wide, hair loose, sitting up in her bed in France with a blanket around her shoulders and the expression of someone who had been awake for 17 hours waiting for something to resolve. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Hello," she said. "Hello, Gabrielle." "You're really all right," she said. Not a question. She knew. She'd known the moment the tension in the thread released. But saying it mattered. "Really," he said. She breathed out. It was a long exhale, the exhale of a 9-year-old who had spent the day feeling everything across a channel, and her shoulders came down, and she looked at him in the mirror with those pale eyes that had been looking at him since she was 4 years old. "Tell me," she said. So he told her. All of it, the same way he always told her things, straight, no softening, no performance. The maze and Fleur and the cup and the cemetery and Voldemort in the grass and the choice he'd made and Apollon on the lawn and the Aurors. He told it in 10 minutes, simply, and she listened the whole way through with her blanket around her shoulders and her silver gold hair loose. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. "You offered him the choice," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He thought about it. "Because the difference between what I am and what he became is the choices made," he said. "And I don't want to close off choices as a habit. Even for people who don't deserve them." Gabrielle held that for a moment. "My papa would like you," she said, which was the highest compliment she gave. Her father was quiet and bookish and thought carefully about things, and Gabrielle measured intelligence by how carefully people thought rather than how quickly they spoke. "I know," Harry said. "I like him too." She smiled. It was a proper smile, full, which she gave rarely and meant entirely. "I am very glad you are alive, Harry." "Me too," he said. "I mean it more than you mean it," she said. "You can't measure that." "I can," she said. "I have a direct line." She tapped her sternum. He touched his own. The warmth pulsed, easy and warm and permanent. 9 years from a garden in Surrey, across a channel, across a school year, across a maze and a cemetery and back to this, a fire burning low and a mirror and a 9-year-old girl in France who had walked into a garden at 4 years old because her magic had already decided. "Gabrielle," he said. "Yes. Thank you." She looked at him with those pale eyes. "For what?" "For walking through that gate," he said. "When you were 4. You didn't have to." "My magic didn't give me a choice," she said. "Your magic gave you a direction," he said. "You walked." She thought about this. "Yes," she said. "I did." A small pause. "You would have been fine without me." "I would have survived," Harry said. "That's not the same as fine." The fire popped. Somewhere in the castle, a door closed. The mirror was warm in his hand. "Go to sleep," she said. "You have been in a maze and a cemetery and you need sleep. So do you." "I will sleep now that I know." She reached toward the mirror as if reaching toward him, the way she'd done since she was small, and he held it up and she touched the glass from her side. "Rest," she said. "You have time now." He had time. That was new and large and true. "Good night, Gabrielle." "Bonne nuit, mon ami," she said, and the mirror cleared and went dark and he put it on the cushion beside him and sat in front of the low fire alone and thought about time. He had time. The ritual was destroyed. Voldemort was bound in a containment vessel in an Auror's office in London, being processed by a ministry that had been given irrefutable evidence by a retired Auror and a 15-year-old and was struggling to make its peace with both. Wormtail was in custody. Crouch Jr. would be questioned. The network of followers would be mapped. Dumbledore would work, and Apollon would work, and the ministry would eventually work because the evidence didn't give it the option not to. Harry would go back to the Dursleys for the summer because the blood wards were still useful and he knew it, and he'd spend the summer reading and writing to Gabrielle and calling Apollon and visiting France in August, and in September he'd come back to Hogwarts and he'd be 16 and Hermione would have a list of things she thought they should address in 5th year and Ron would have Quidditch opinions and Neville would have grown 3 inches over the summer and surprised himself again. The world was not fixed. He knew that. Voldemort bound was not Voldemort defeated, it was contained, delayed, a problem moved from active to managed, and managed problems required continuous management, and the management was work he'd do because it needed doing and not because it scared him or thrilled him. He thought about Fleur saying be what you are and let them catch up. He thought about the Sorting Hat saying you're already decided. He thought about Apollon in a kitchen in Surrey, crouching to his eye level, saying you are worth choosing. He thought about Hermione in the library saying you're not what I expected and deciding to sit down anyway. About Ron on a chess board with blood on his face saying just go. About Neville in the chamber corridor, trembling and going anyway, because that was the whole definition of the thing. He thought about a spider named Colonel navigating a dead end. He thought about a 4-year-old girl who had walked through a gate in Surrey because her magic had pointed her in a direction and she had trusted it completely, the way children trusted things before the world taught them not to, and she had been right, and she still was, and the warmth in his chest was the proof of it. He sat in the common room until the fire went out. Then he went upstairs and slept, easily and completely and without any architecture of fear holding him awake, the way he'd been sleeping since he was 5 years old, and something had clicked open from the inside in a garden on Privet Drive. In the morning the castle smelled of coffee and stone and summer beginning. Harry came downstairs to find Ron already at breakfast and Hermione already reading and Neville watering a small plant on the windowsill that he'd brought from home and which seemed, by the quality of its growth, to be responding to the particular care of someone who understood it. He sat down. He poured coffee. He'd started drinking coffee this year, black, which Hermione found excessive and Ron found incomprehensible and which Harry found useful. "Right," Ron said, without preamble. "So, what's the plan for 5th year?" "There isn't one yet," Harry said. "But there will be," Hermione said, not looking up from her book. "There will be," Harry agreed. Neville came back from the windowsill and sat down and looked at his breakfast with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finished doing something that needed doing. "Whatever it is," Neville said, "I'm in." Harry looked at him. Neville had been saying some version of this since a girl's bathroom in 2nd year and had meant it every time and had proved it every time, and Harry found he never stopped being glad about it. "I know," Harry said. Ron was looking out the window at the grounds, the lake blue in the early summer morning, the lawns still damp. "It's a nice day," he said. It was. Harry drank his coffee and thought about 5 years of this table, these people, this castle that had grown from an unknown quantity into somewhere he knew every stone of. He thought about what was built and what was coming and the difference between the two, and how the built things were what made the coming things navigable. Across the great hall, the post arrived, a dozen owls, routine, the morning mail, and among them one small French owl he recognized, one of the Delacour relay birds, dropping a letter onto his plate with the business-like punctuality of a well-trained owl and leaving without ceremony. He opened it. One line, in Gabrielle's sloping purple handwriting, J.E. Savais K2 Reviendres. "Gee, I knew you'd come back." He folded it and put it in his pocket. He drank his coffee. The summer morning did what summer mornings did, which was to continue being a summer morning regardless of what had happened the night before or what was coming next, and the lake was blue and the grass was green and the warmth behind his sternum was steady and permanent and had been since he was 5 years old in a garden on Privet Drive talking to a spider that couldn't understand him, not knowing that the gate was about to squeal. He hadn't known. But the magic had. The magic had already decided, and it had been right, and he trusted it the way he trusted most things that had earned trust through 9 years of being reliable, completely, and without reservation, and with the full understanding that trust was not the absence of uncertainty but the willingness to move forward through it. He moved forward. He always had. He always would. For Gabrielle, who walked through the gate. For Harry, who was already there.